Welcome, everyone. In this episode, we sat down with the world's #1 life and business strategist, Tony Robbins. Nearly 8 years ago, Robbins published what is still one of the best-selling financial books of the century, Money, Master the Game. Robbins has unprecedented access to many of the world's leading financial minds, from Ray Dalio to Paul Tudor Jones, to Jeff Gundlach, to Steve Forbes, and many others. We all want to know, what are the world's leading investors doing to navigate the post-pandemic world where inflation is raging, real rates on bonds are negative, and the global stock market is at a 100-year high? We also cover many other interesting topics, such as how business owners, including Robbins, have had to pivot to learn to thrive in the new world, how to protect oneself against an inevitable correction or crash, how top investors are looking at cryptocurrency, and of course, how to expand your goals of impact to create true fulfillment. Joining Robbins is Ajay Gupta, Robbins's longtime personal advisor. Gupta is recently retired from his role as chief investment strategist of a $90 billion investment advisory firm. I ask many probing questions on how he manages his own personal wealth and what he is sharing with many of the ultra high net worth families in his network. And to round it off, Robbins and Gupta are joined by Christopher Zuck, founder of Kaz Investments, a 20-year-old firm that provides exclusive access to unique alternative investments. Christopher shared some very interesting strategies related to private equity, private credit, and mitigating risk in the event of a market crash or correction. Also, for clarification, the speakers spend time discussing tail hedging as a way to mitigate risk if or when the markets correct. They use insurance as an analogy in the same way one would insure their car or home. Keep in mind, any references made in this discussion are related to tail hedging and do not refer to an actual insurance product. Without further ado, enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to your screens, it's Angelo Robles.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's really exciting. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Before we begin this amazing interview, I wanted to thank a couple of the organizations that were critical to the participation. My own Family Office Association, our members in our Resource Council, and sharing the information with our guests. Our good friends at Tiger 21, we appreciate their support as well. Tony Robbins' Platinum Partners, and the special guest of Kaz Investments and Ajay Gupta. Well, this is really exciting. I really look forward to it. I have a lot of questions, and we're going to get right to it. On the first question, each guest will have a chance to very briefly introduce themselves. I don't know if one of our guests, Tony, really needs to do that because you know them all already, but I will leave that up to him. Tony, we're going to start with you. We are sitting here in the middle of this incredible studio. I've seen it on Instagram. I've seen it on some of the posts, but to be here is really amazing. Tell us the story about kind of how this all came about. I'm sure it's a story worth telling.
In my business, overnight we were made illegal. If I was doing an event, in San Jose, California, and we had, 12,500 people with 2 weeks to go. So we ended up about 14, 15,000 people normally. And people started calling me and saying, "Are you going to cancel the event?" And I was like, "Do you know who you're talking to? Like, I have mercury poisoning, and I lost a third of my blood supply while I was in Australia, and I bled out, And the doctor said, you're going to be here for 4 days. I said, I'm in the middle of a seminar. Give me a wheelchair. I literally finished the seminar in a wheelchair. So I said, there's no way in hell I'm canceling this. There's going to be 14, 15,000 people. And a few days later, it was taken out of my hands. Like a lot of businesses, all of a sudden, they said 10 people is your maximum, the governor in California. And then the next thing happened in Australia and the UK. And so what do you do? What do you do when 95% of your revenue is taken away? And your mission, in my case, it's more than money for me. And I said, okay, we're going to Vegas. They're never going to shut down Vegas, right? Sure enough, they shut down Vegas. I couldn't believe it, right? So it's like, okay, here's what we'll do. We're going to rent 1,500 movie theaters, and we'll put 10 people in each one, and we'll handle people where they are. It'll be more convenient, make it work. They shut down the movie theaters. And I was like, okay, we're going to go to Houston. I got a friend with a mega church. I'll rent his mega church. They're not going to keep open Costco while they shut down a mega church, but of course they did. So I was like, holy cow. So I finally said, a friend of mine said, you got to do a webinar. And I went and watched a guy do a webinar with two 52-inch screens. And I was like, I'll kill myself first because I'm used to a stadium where we're rocking the music and the intensity and the interaction. So I said, get out a tape recorder. I said, here's what we're going to do. And I brought my team and I said, we're going to find a building with 40-foot high ceilings, which is what we have here. We're going to put up 20-foot high LED screens, 0.67, highest resolution in the world, 50 feet wide, surround me around it. We're going to go to the founder of Eric Yuan of Zoom and say, look, we need to get 100,000 people, not 1,000. How do we increase the capacity? I'm going to create an app for your phone so that there can be interactivity. So when you clap, you shake your phone, it sends a signal, and the more people that clap, the louder it gets. Or the laughter, like some people were just doing who know us, they're shaking their piece. It makes the laughter happen. And we made this interactive experience. And we went from seminars of 12 to 15,000 people. In my first one, we had 25,000 people, then 75,000 people in 195 countries. Then I did a 6-day program for 927,000 people.
My God.
And when we start here, we start at 10 a.m. And I'm a long events, they're full days. So we go 13 hours. So in Australia, it's midnight. They go from midnight to 1 or 2 in the afternoon, 4 days in a row. So normally I would see maybe, I'd go to, on an average, let's say 110, 115 cities, 10 to 15 countries each year. They're all multi-day seminars. I'd see 250,000 people. This year we've seen 2.2 million people. I got to be home, and I also decided that there's something my wife and I tried for years, so I now have a 4.5-month, almost 5-month baby girl. So all because I'm no longer a nomad, right? Figured out what to do. But I think all of us have to deal with the first steps. Like it's like a death. It's like shock. And then there's denial, can't be. And then there's sadness. And then there's bargaining. And then some people accept. But I think there's a final step that you go through when you have a shock like that, which is create. And so we decided to go create. And the creation really changed the game.
I mean, you're actually reaching an audience that is multiple times bigger than it was before. You're impacting more people.
Yes, without a doubt. And for my employees who own the company, we're an ESOP. So for my employees, it's unbelievable because also it's made a larger margin for them. So their wealth is growing while I'm able to help more
Too
people.
late for me to come in?
We've done really well. We've done, the company, to give you an idea, has done better than, all of the stocks like Apple and Netflix, the FANG stocks. It's outproduced them, and we've compounded more than 20% a year for 11 straight years in this business. And last year, in the worst year ever, half the year we lost about $110 million because I didn't want to fire people. We kept thinking it would change, but we ended up the year still up 5%, which was pretty amazing.
That is. Let's talk about one of your books. I love this one. Money, Master the Game was #1 on the New York Times bestseller and still probably is the best-selling finance book of this century. Tell us about your journey to write that book, which is now nearly about 8 years ago.
Yeah, almost 8 years. Well, it started with just anger, to be honest with you. I've coached Paul Tudor Jones now for, I think, 24 years. Maybe it's longer now. I think it might be coming up on 30. We started in 1992, so I guess almost 30 years.
Wow.
And he's, one of the greatest financial traders in history. And I've had year after year where I worked with him and knew what he's doing every single day. So I learned a little bit. But when I saw all these people in 2008 being destroyed, and I knew why, a small number of players were destroying the financial system, it made me crazy angry. And I thought someone's going to do something. And of course, the punishment was we gave them more of our money, which is crazy what happened. And so I was like, what's wrong with this? So I thought, I'm only one guy, but I have one unique gift, which is access. I have access to the greatest financial minds in the world. And because I work with Paul, I'd learned a little bit, to say the least, over all those decades. And so I decided to interview 50 of the smartest people in the world financially. So Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, Warren Buffett, some people like Sir John Templeton right before he passed. David Swinson from Yale, took him from $1 billion to, what is it now? I think $35 billion they did for Yale. And so I took all the best of what I learned from them and said, I want to write a book that my billionaire clients are going to love, but that's not a big market. I want to do it for people that are baby boomers that think it's too late, or for maybe a millennial who's going through college and they got all this debt and they think they'll never get out. I want to write something clear enough, but with the greatest minds possible. And fortunately, we pulled it off. And in doing so, though, along the way, it became more of an even larger mission for me, because while I'm interviewing these billionaires, I'm watching Congress cut the SNAP program. Food stamps is what we used to call it. And I grew up with that. Well, there are a lot of families surviving. And they cut it by, I think it was $4.5 billion. So the equivalent of every family in America that actually needs help would have to give up a week's worth of meals every month, unless the private sector jumped in. And I've been feeding people since I was 17 years old. When I was 11, my family got fed on Thanksgiving. We had no food, and it was a very impactful event. It made me care about people in a different way, because strangers care about me. I want to care about strangers. So I promised myself I'd do this. So at 17, I fed 2 families, and then 4, and then 8. Eventually got it to 1 million families a year, then 4 million families, 2 million from people, and 2 million from me. And then when I'm writing this book, I'm sitting with all these multi-billionaires, and I'm saying, this is insane. We're the richest country on earth, and we've got more than 35 million people that know where the next meal is going to come from. And so I called my team and I said, how many people have I fed in my lifetime? I'd never added up, and it was 42 million. I was like, that's pretty cool. I was like, what if I fed 50 million people in a year? I was like, what if I fed 100 million people? What if I fed 100 million people a year for 10 years and I fed 1 billion meals? So then I said, where am I going to do that? I said, I'll do it with Feeding America. And then I started with this book. I'll give 100% of the profits of this book. Of course, I had to add a lot more money than that. But I'm proud to tell you we're at 800 million meals, and we're a year ahead of schedule right now. So we're going to hit the billion meals. But it's really amazing to see. I know there's so many family offices out there, and I'm not here to lecture you in any way. I'm sure many of you are already committed to some forms of contribution. But it ignites growth in investments in business when you've got another reason to do it beyond yourself. Most of us who your clients are dealing with have already made it. We're not needing to make more money. It's part of the game of life to expand. But part of the game of life is to give back. And so when I talk to some family offices and they're interested, I give them 2 pieces of advice to consider. Many of them are already doing this. If you are, it's obvious. But the way I do it is everything I do, just like an investor, I want to get a greater return. So my standard on everything I do in philanthropy is matching funds. And then I get to set the standard. So I said to them, I want to feed 100 million meals. I want you to match me if I'm going to do this. Go get all your donors. We want to double this. And we want to get it after 10 years where you can do 100 million meals a year without me. So we got a base there. So like last week, I did a business program. It's not designed for fundraising, but we help people turn their businesses around, business entrepreneurs all around the world. And then we have a section where they're setting goals, financial goals, and then dreams, including contribution. And so I'll say, listen, I invited a guy for 2 minutes to share about, slavery in this country. There are more people enslaved in the world than any time in history, in sexual slavery. And the guy's really efficient and showed what he was doing. And I said, listen, let's save 1,000 lives. I said, I'll put up the first $250,000. You guys match me. I'll dollar for dollar. And we raised 1.3 million and saved 2,600 lives in 45 minutes, right? So I think everything I do, I encourage you to get the maximum impact for the dollars you're going to contribute as an officer for your clients. And then the other thing is just having big enough goals that excites people. Donald Trump's not a very popular a lot of people, but I remember decades ago, I knew him really well. He talked about it's harder to finance a condo in Brooklyn, at least back then, than it is to get people to finance the Empire State Building, because there's more fees, there's more everything. And I think the same thing is true in contributions. So I said, I want to feed 1 billion people sustainably, right, through time. So I put together an X Prize, and we got all these people competing with all these technologies to bring the price point for this food down and have a much smaller footprint on the environment and so forth. But when you got a goal that big, I was like, okay, I'll put up the first 1 million. We need 20 million for this project. And so I went to the UAE, and I have some good friends there, His Highness Sheikh Tanoon, and also MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, amazing human beings. And they put up the other 19 million like that. So it's like, think about how you can set the standard by going first, maximizing what you're doing, and then secondly, pick up some goals that are so big that you can attract other people who also in the long term you may want to do business with as well, but they'll be excited by the impact you can have together.
That's tremendous, and great to see your dedication to philanthropy, which I know to our members, and I'm sure your relationships as well, is so important. We do have 2 other special guests with us today. I'll be bouncing back and forth. I'd like to have a chance to introduce Christopher Zuck. Why don't you have a chance, Christopher, to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get right to my questions for you.
Certainly. So I am from Houston, Texas. Been there all my life. Married to my high school sweetheart. I have a son who's 26 and a beautiful daughter-in-law, Cecilia. And started Kaz Investments in 2001. So we just celebrated our 20th anniversary.
That's fantastic. And I don't know if you could all see on camera, but he has on the most amazing cowboy boots. And I was saying prior to when we started, I have a pair. You wouldn't guess it from Greenwich, Connecticut, but I really enjoy mine. And if I knew that, I would have rocked them as well. How do you view asset allocation, which we'll get to, I guess, how do you also view and make decisions on new opportunities?
You know, it's probably one of the things where the science of investing becomes art. And ultimately, when we look at investments, we approach things in what we feel is a pretty unique way, which is everything's about the downside. So literally, we say it in every investment committee meeting. We say it in every conversation. What's the worst case scenario? How does somebody do us wrong? How do we get hurt? How does this actually end up blowing up in our face? Not because we missed something, but just because we didn't anticipate the what if. So once we feel like we can identify the worst case scenario and we can live with it, the upside will take care of itself. So when we look at asset allocation, it's all about the approach of what is the what if that we're trying to avoid. If we can deal with that worst case scenario, then everything else will fit together just very well. We want to always start with the negative, and then ultimately it's really easy to get to the positive. So when we look at asset allocation, obviously it's dependent on every family and everybody's individual situation, but ultimately it's what is the major outcome that you're trying to seek to accomplish. If it's cash flow, if it's growth, if it's inflation protection, whatever it is, that key number one variable has to drive everything. And I've used a formula in almost every major decision that I've ever made. What's my number one priority? What's my number two priority, three priority? Very rarely can you get all three of those priorities done while accomplishing one and two perfectly. So can't always do it perfectly, but what we want is to make sure no matter what ends up happening in the world that we've accomplished the first objective, and then once we've secured that, we want to get the second objective, and then we'll try to get to the third. So ultimately, it's about what's your outcome, where are you trying to get to, and then ultimately it'll drive that asset allocation decision.
Excellent. You remind me to probably rethink some of my asset allocation decisions. That was really good. And the gentleman to my left-hand side, this would be Ajay Gupta. Before I get to my question for you, Ajay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Angelo. Tony took me for an unbelievable journey of a lifetime when he was writing Money Master the Game. When he was interviewing the likes of Ray Dalio, Paul Tudor Jones, Chuck Schwab, John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, I had front row seats to those interviews. I was the only financial professional in the world that had those front row seats. And if I wasn't at the interview, I have the recordings. And some of these were meaningful 3-4 hour conversations. And I learned more in those 250 hours of recordings than I have in the last 25 years of advising ultra high net worth families.
Wow.
And of that 25 years, about 12, 13 years, I was working for the large brokerage firms, running a large team, and then ultimately started my own firm in 2008. Started in 2013 and retired last year after I sold my stake to General Atlantic, where we were managing about $50 billion when I retired.
Oh, that's all. And General Atlantic is an amazing company, so kudos to you. As you noted, you were the chief investment strategist for really an organization that had, about 80 billion, that was billion, everyone, in AUM. You still speak with investors every day. What do you talk to them about?
Yeah, it's grown since I retired as well. Yes, I think it's crossing 90 billion right now. You know, I spoke with clients every single day, 7 days a week, and I enjoyed it. It's the relationship. We talked about their personal wealth, but it still continues as a retired person. And typically, they're sending me texts, they're sending me articles, they want to pick my brain on what I'm thinking. And the typical conversations right now are like, AJ, I'm reducing my bonds, I'm going more into equities right now. You know what, I'm now 80-20, 80% stocks and 20% bonds. And saying to me, AJ, 80-20 is the new 60-40. And these were individuals that were 60-40 a year ago. And when the pandemic happened, they liquidated their equities. So it scares me when I see them leaning in aggressively into equities. And within their equity bucket, They're throwing out the boring blue chip dividend paying companies and loading up more on high tech technology that is at all-time highs. So it concerns me. And when I talk to them about risk management, they're like, AJ, the Fed will bail us out. There'll be a little bit of a correction and things will recover. So I'm not really too worried about that. Well, things like that start to scare me. Or when someone calls me and says, AJ, at my country club, one of my buddies just offered me an investment into a venture capital opportunity. And if I invest before month end, I'm going to get in at a $50 million valuation. But if I wait till next month, it's going to be $100 million. So should I not jump in right now and I'll kind of double my money in a month? And it reminds me of a story. I was an advisor to the Sharks on Shark Tank a few years ago. And I remember sitting there and listening to the pitches. And I just thought, what if somebody walked out onto Shark Tank and looked at Mark Cuban and said, Mark, I'm willing to sell you 1% of my company for $1 million. But if you don't commit before the next commercial, it's going to be $200 million. He'd get thrown out right away. So I'm having these conversations, and I'm like trying to talk about risk management, and I'm getting pushback. I'll give you one more example. Is I'm having more opportunities pitched to me where it's 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x opportunities, and the system is not supposed to be built that way where you're supposed to double your money that easily. I had someone reach out to me.
I want to know about your 10x opportunities.
But I had someone reach out to me about 10 days ago, and they said, hey, we've got this luxury mansion in Beverly Hills, and if you go in right now, everyone knows about this opportunity, so it's already public, but somehow I'm going to be the lucky investor that gets this. If you invest in it right now and take some leverage, you could probably double your equity in 12 months. And I said, wow, in Beverly Hills. I go, who's the seller? And they said, Goldman Sachs.
They're usually on the right side of the trade. Be careful.
My friends at Goldman Sachs, they don't leave that kind of money on the table.
No.
So it's a little scary what I'm seeing out there right now.
Really good. Tony, you know all these amazing titans, Paul Tudor Jones, Ray Dalio, Steve Forbes, and many others. What have you gleaned and learned from them during COVID over the last 18 months?
Well, that it's corny, but it's true that, crisis creates opportunity always, right? We saw the opportunities and we were able to participate in that. And I'm fortunate enough to become good friends with these guys. Paul Tudor, obviously, for decades, but Ray's a good friend now. So I get to have these amazing conversations to guide my decision making. And then, and the two of us here work together, AJ, on what we're going to do with it. But I think the fundamentals that are critical at a time like this, first is not to be spooked, obviously, because people have these reactions like they did, in April or May of last year. And when you overreact, you overreact. And remembering, I had the privilege of spending quite some time with Sir John Templeton, who was just an incredible human being. I did the last live interview before he passed away. And I met him when I was 30, so I had a long-term relationship with him. And his whole thing was, most people know, he got wealthy by one philosophy, which is it's at times of maximum pessimism when the greatest opportunity exists. Things burn down a lot faster than they grow up. And so I'm always looking for where those opportunities are. I'm looking for what the impact can be. And one of the reasons we're here is because after we sold our stake in CPI, both of us, I got out for a while and I was like, because it was getting boring and I just wanted to look at something new. And AJ's retired. And I said, AJ, you're not going to stay retired. Everybody and their brother's coming to you and you and I are bouncing off each other every day. I said, let's find a way to serve. Let's look at some alternative investments. Because if you really look at the returns over the last 20 years on the S&P 500 versus obviously bonds versus what you see in alternative investments, it's mind-boggling. You're seeing a difference between, say, 20 years of 15 years of 10% returns in the S&P, but we'll throw it up, I'm sure, on the screen for you guys, but I'm sure you must know. But we're talking about 13.3 on alternative investments. I'm talking about those types of investments that really can give the greatest return. And so I have a lot of financial partners and friends and people I coach, and it's like, man, if that had been my focus, I love what I do, but I've done quite well, but you do even better. If you look at the Fortune 400 and say, which industry produces the most billionaires? And I ask people that, they usually say tech or they say real estate, and it's not true. It's the financial services business, right? But it's not hedge funds. They come and go. And the guys like Paul Tudor and Ray obviously are the exception, but it's really private equity because they got a 5-year hold period. They got their 2 and 20. And I've looked at that and said, people are working to get in those to get greater returns. It's like, how could I be a general partner in some of those? And so I had one firm, I sold my company to my employees as an ESOP. And then when you do an ESOP, you have external valuator that comes in, and then you go out and you basically don't have to pay taxes for the company until people take it out. It's kind of like a 401k on steroids for the whole company. And so we were paying, I don't know, $20 million a year and more in taxes. And so that money now goes to buy the interest for your employees. And so, you go to get banks and I'm going to sell the company for $220 million for about half of it. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll borrow that $100 million, let the company borrow it. It's appropriate. And all these banks came and bid. And then we had this private credit firm that came in and outbid everybody. Unbelievable. But then after about a month, to get all the paperwork, and I start adding up the numbers because, that's what we do. And I'm like, this is almost 8% when you put everything in. I said, there's no way in hell I'm going to do this deal with you. They said, well, the banks are going to want to do with you now that you've pushed them away. I said, well, if they don't, I don't care. I don't need the money. I'll self-finance and charge 3% to my company instead of 8%. But I said, I want a piece of you. And they all laughed. Now I want a piece of them, right? So there's 3 firms I'd already done that with. And it's been some of the greatest returns because you're buying wholesale, right? First of all, you're getting your 2%. You're not a limited partner. You're a general partner. So I got my 2%, which covers my investment, compounded. But then the 20% upside is amazing. And the other part is when you get in those, you have a horizon. You have the business they've already done in the past, which sometimes is better valuations in the past. You have the present, you have the future. But also then you have the opportunity to sell that firm for a multiple because I help those firms grow. And as they grow, their margin gets bigger because, it doesn't take that much more when you have, AUM that increases in terms of manpower. And then, so I'm in this mode, and then we meet Christopher. AJ introduced him to me. He goes, this guy went through your programs, and he lives everything you teach in business, and he doubled his business in the last 3 years, and he's, up to $2 billion plus. And then we started talking about, what's the big risk right now? Because when I look at what I've learned from these professionals, as you say, Ray Dalio taught me probably the most important principle of all. And I was with him at a JP Morgan conference where you have to have $1 billion net worth to be there. So it's a pretty rarefied group. And Ray got up. I was speaking right after Ray, and he got up and he was sharing all kinds of things. And then somebody finally said, well, what's the most important principle investing you've learned in your lifetime? And I'd already asked him a similar question, so I knew the answer. But what I got to do was watch the audience response to some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. And he said, the holy grail to investing is really simple. He said, you want 8 to 12, maybe ideally 15 uncorrelated assets that you feel strong about. He said, if you have 3, you reduce your risk by 50%. If you have 6, the same, just by having them or correlated, statistically, you have 60% less risk. If you have 12 to 15, you have 80% less risk, and you've got, a return risk factor of up to 5. So I try to look at that and I said, the only way to do that today is alternative investments, because you talk to Ray and he says, look, cash is trash, right? Inflation's destroying it. I talked to, Jeffrey Gundlach, the bond king, don't buy any bonds, right? You're crazy to buy bonds. When he says don't buy bonds, or a very limited number, we all know that, but it's coming from Jeffrey. It's pretty amazing, right? And then you turn around and you say, okay, well then, where am I to get my investments? You got to do them with alternatives. So that's the specialty here. And also he's providing for RIAs. He's not going to individuals. And so that's my goal. I want to empower more RIAs so they have more tools. And so we formed a partnership from there. And I'm real excited about what we're doing. But then the last part was, I learned about tail risk from all these guys. Yeah. Right? And, I didn't know what tail risk was. Take 3 to 5% of your assets and protect the vast majority of them. But what you're investing is in insurance. Like if you make this investment and the market goes down, this side's going to go up. But if it doesn't, you're going to lose that cash. But it's a small price to pay. And the smartest people have done this. And so I started looking around for that and, saw the gentleman who did the Black Swan, and saw he had this. He had a 4,000% return last year.
It was incredible.
It was insane. And as I was like, but the problem is, a lot of people, they don't, like CalPERS, they make these investments and it's insurance, they're not getting a return. And then sure enough in 2020, you can tell them the details, they didn't reinvest. They lost like $1 billion return they could have had of protection when things went down. So I said, is there some way we can design this where you had some other asset in there? Maybe you didn't get a 10 times return. Maybe it was a 6 or 7, but where you could cover it so every year you weren't losing money on the insurance, then people would stick with it. And this gentleman figured a way to do that. So I'm excited about what the opportunities are right now. Crisis creates opportunities, but if you do the same old thing, it's not going to happen. And these guys doing 80-20, ask Ray Dalio about 80-20. He'll tell you when people said even 60-40 or 50-50, he said, Tony, that is not a balanced portfolio. He says, this is the illusion the financial planners have been telling people for years. Because if you look at bonds versus stocks, stocks have 3 times the volatility. So if it's 50-50, it's not 50-50. That's really like 80-20. And most people, 60-40, it's like 90-10. So these people are putting their people at huge risk because they don't know where else they can put it. And we're at 100-year highs right now in multiples. Yeah. So people don't have anywhere place to put their money except real estate. But that's why you ought to have some insurance of some sort. So I'm pretty insured. I first just did some with the Black Swan guys. It was a little bit expensive in my mind. And so I said, can we do it cheaper? Can we do it more efficient? Can we do it in a way? Because CAS's philosophy is on most of their investments, there's a lot of things. There's nothing up front. We only have return on the upside. And so that's pretty irresistible offer because people see you're in it for their true benefit as opposed to just profiting on the other side. So I'm excited to bring people opportunities when it feels like there's not a lot.
Well, Christopher, that's quite the build-up. It's really amazing what you're doing at CAS.
He deserves it.
And yeah, absolutely, he does. So we're going to, of course, direct a question to you. With yields near all-time lows and credit spreads as tight as ever, can plain vanilla bonds still add value to portfolios? And how does that play into that verbiage again, the traditional 60-40 portfolio?
You know, it's really hard because of the fact that bonds do have some characteristics that are attractive. They're totally liquid. You have a fixed coupon in most cases, so you know what you're going to get when you're going to get it. However, in this environment, it just simply mathematically cannot do what it has historically done. It's just not capable of providing the protection that it used to. So part of what we've been working on so much is to come up with a way for people to get that yield, get that predictability, but also to be able to have the protection against the what if. So in this world today, credit spreads are just going to go higher when stress comes into the market. That's just happened over time, every time that we've seen a major market event. You know that yields could go a little lower. They're 1.25, whatever it is on the 10-year treasury right now, so they can go a little bit lower, but they can't ever provide the protection and the consistency of cash flow that we got when we had 6, 7, 8% 10-year treasuries. So people have to look outside of plain vanilla. They have to go into more private credit, more creative credit, more structured credit, things that are still very, very safe. But sometimes you got to give something to get something. Yeah, so you may have to give up some liquidity in order to be able to get that better return. But over time, it is irrefutable that these yields are more predictable. The total returns are better. They're more consistent. There's less downside. If you're willing to give up a small amount of liquidity, you can get a much better return.
AJ? What scares you the most? And you're not allowed to say, I'm a Giants fan, the New York Giants offense.
I can tell you right now, the thing that scares me the most is how much leverage investors are taking within their portfolio. It's shocking. Margin balances are hitting extreme all-time highs again. People are borrowing. I was speaking with someone and they said, AJ, I'm borrowing at 1.2% against my portfolio. That's free money. I'm investing it, earning 10. I'm making 8% give or take spread. Why wouldn't I do that? And I let them know that, first of all, I'm borrowing at 0.6%. So you could actually reduce that rate by half, number one. But even then, that money could be the most expensive money you've ever borrowed if you're investing it and you don't have staying power. I recall the days when people got wiped out in the internet crash, early 2000, 2008, 2009. The leverage that people had on their portfolio wiped them out, put them back 10 years. I know, it's really sad to say, but I know there's people right now out there in the country that are worth over $100 million, and they consider themselves very sophisticated, and they're going to lose 100% of their wealth in the next big correction for a couple reasons. Over-leveraged and concentration. So I'm talking to those people as they're calling me, and if they want my opinion, because I'm not an advisor anymore, I'm reminding them to have some downside protection in this environment. And the biggest advice that I can give anyone is, right now, stress test your portfolio. What do I mean by that? Look at your portfolio with your advisor or your advisors and just look at it and say, what if there was a 50% correction tomorrow in the two largest asset classes that you're exposed to? Would you have staying power? Would your liquid portfolio be liquidated for margin calls? Or would you have an overextended real estate portfolio that you can't afford to keep and have to give it back to the banks? Look at your portfolio. we've had more than 100 corrections in the last 100 years. The average correction's been 14%, and there will be, unfortunately, 50% corrections at some point in all asset classes. I don't know when that's going to be, but I know that it will happen, and those that have staying power will get through it. And more importantly, those that have the wherewithal to be a buyer when that correction happens, they're the ones that are going to make substantial wealth. I'll just tell you one story. Remember in 2006 and 2007, I was speaking with some investors, and they were buying properties in a town called Hemet in Riverside. And they said, AJ, this is the best way to make money. I'm getting 100% financing and no income verification loans, and they were buying these homes for like $180,000. They'd buy it for $180,000, paint inside, and sell for $200,000. The person that bought it for $200,000 would also get 100% financing, no income verification, change some faucets, sell for $220,000. And I watched it go $220,000, $240,000, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I think I'm in the wrong business because this was happening lightning speed. And I remember telling them, this isn't the way the system is supposed to work, where it's easy money like this. You are taking risk. 18 to 24 months later, I was buying those homes for $39,000. And what's interesting is although the prices had dropped and the banks had taken massive write-downs, the rents that you were able to collect had not changed. So if you were collecting $1,000 rent when they were $300,000,
Right.
you were still collecting almost $1,000. And the crazy part, when I was buying them for $39,000, and by the way, I was buying streets of them, I was nervous. I was actually nervous buying them, even though when I was putting homeowners insurance on it, they said, this will cost $150,000 just to replace the property. And I was still nervous to buy those properties.
I got a follow-up for you on that. So if you're going to potentially take advantage of distressed opportunities and downturns happen, so eventually, sure, I don't know, next week, next year, in 2 years, do you have the cash available, but then that cash is earning little now, but you got to take the money from somewhere?
Sure. So my thought, as the way I'm preparing myself right now, is I have minimal leverage right now at this moment. And if there was a buying opportunity, I'm going to be able to take advantage of two things. Number one, I will be able to borrow against my portfolio if I wanted to, because there's buying opportunity because I'm not overextended. And number two, I have explosive insurance or tail risk protection within my portfolio. So when there is a 10, 20, 30% correction, a small portion of my portfolio is going to explode and allow me to have a huge windfall. And if I take that capital and invest it in asset classes to rebalance my portfolio, that'll be an opportunity for me to be not only fully invested, but take advantage of buying opportunities.
Excellent. Tony, I understand you're working on a new book called Life Force, which sounds incredibly exciting. Can you share a bit about it, and when can we expect to see it on the shelves?
Well, it does come out the next February because I'm finishing it literally by Wednesday. So it's been a 2-year project. I decided to do in the area of health. I think health is the real wealth, right? You know, a person, with health has a million dreams. A person who's ill has one. How do I get well? It doesn't matter how much money you have. And so I had an experience where I was being a little crazy and I was doing snowboarding with a 20-year-old, and I tried to do this crazy flip, and I ripped my rotator cuffs in my shoulder so badly that I was in 9/9 pain, like unable to breathe, unable to sleep, nerve pain. And I went and saw these doctors, and they all said, surgery, surgery, surgery. And I was like, well, what's the rehab time? Well, 6 months. And I started reading that a lot of those surgeries get torn again, so there's no guarantee it's going to work. And I can't do that with my life and schedule. So I didn't give up. And I went to a good friend of mine, Dr. Peter Diamandis, who's just brilliant and well networked in that environment. And he took me to this top stem cell guy in the world, Dr. Bob Harari, who kind of discovered how stem cells work. He gave rats decades ago, old rats, young rats blood, and they grew younger hair and muscles and vice versa. The other ones got old. And that's how stem cells were discovered. And he said, Tony, you don't want to do it in this country. It's worthless for this type of thing. It's too severe. You need young stem cells. He said, I'm not talking about fetal tissue, obviously. He said, I know you wouldn't do that. He's saying, but I'm talking about cord. Cords are thrown away when babies are born. A 4-day-old cord has so much more power. So I went to Panama. Before I went there, the last doctor I saw sat me down and said, now, you've changed my life. I didn't know him, but you've helped me with my marriage, and I made all this more money, but now I have to be your doctor. And this is what he said to me. He looked me in the eyes and said, let me show you your spine. He said, you have massive spinal stenosis. One more snowboarding accident, one good fall, one jump, and you're quadriplegic. And it's like, if you're ready for a punch, you can handle it, but I wasn't quite ready for that. So I went down to Panama and I did 4 days of stem cells, like 125 million of them, in an IV and then some injections in my shoulder. First day, felt tired and went to sleep. Second day, I had kind of cytokine response, kind of shaking and cold, but I knew what it was. So I wasn't scared. I woke up the next morning with no pain in my spine for the first time in 14 years. My shoulder is absolutely perfect. I did no surgery. So the next thing I know, I'm invited to the Vatican. The Pope, every 2 years, does a regenerative health conference with all the best stem cell and other forms of regenerative medicine that are out there, because he believes it's a miracle. He doesn't see it as something negative. It's helped many of his friends and family. And I was the cleanup speaker, so I wasn't a dumb idiot just come for my speech. I went for all 4 days. And I was mesmerized. Things that you would think would happen 20 years from now are happening right now. Like there's a company right now in phase 2 trials. It'll be in phase 3 by the time the book comes out, or maybe even through it. They give you a single injection and you regrow. If you have osteoarthritis, regrow over 12 months all of the internal aspects of your body. In other words, your tissues, your tendons, and they grow like you're a 16-year-old because the epigenome is like brand new. You get to, like, it gives the instructions to the body to create this. It's extraordinary. There's a PTSD shot. I've sponsored over 150 veterans who are suicidal. I know how to do a suicide, but there's 32 of them killing themselves a day. So I was looking for a scalable option. And this injection is 85% effective, one injection, and it stops the fight or flight mechanism. And the letters I've gotten from these veterans is just amazing. They don't know me. I just sponsored it, and they knew I sponsored it for them. And they'd write these notes like, I came home from Afghanistan after 3 tours, and I couldn't be with my children, my wife. I had 2 emotions, total rage or numbness. I see no color. I've tried to commit suicide 3 times. I just got back from the shot. It's been an hour. I still have all the memories. I have none of that emotion. I see colors. I just hug my kids for the same time. So those types of breakthroughs, like the same things that you see some of the greatest athletes in the world who used to go for surgery and now they go do stem cells and 3 weeks later they're up and running instead of a year later. Tiger Woods has done it, Ronaldo, all these top players. So what I did was, it's about 675 pages, like Money Master the Game. It's everything. Like, what are the alternatives to chemotherapy that are available today and radiation on the cancer side? What are the greatest breakthroughs literally in every area? So we cover all the diseases, Alzheimer's, all that stuff, but also just peak performance. What are the things that you can do that can absolutely change your life? Right now, for 15 years, Anthony Atala, Dr. Atala at Wake Forest University has worked for the Army, and he's grown like ears for people who have been shot off using your own stem cells. He does 3D printing of organs. And now that is about to explode. There are 3 firms right now that should be in their trials by 2022 next year. And by 2024 or 5, they're talking about creating every organ in the body, including heart. So imagine, this is the way these doctors talk about it. Imagine, like, I'm fortunate enough to have a nice plane, a PBJ, but I didn't buy a brand new one. I bought a 20-year-old plane. It still cost you a lot of money. But I repainted it, I replaced, I got new engines and everything else. And so spending $100 million, I pay, $38 million, and I got this brand new plane. Think of your body that way. Think of an old car. You put a new engine in, put new tires on it. That's basically what they're going to do with our bodies. And I'm not talking about 30 years from now, 20 years. I'm talking about in the next 3 to 5 years. It's happening now for some organs, but an explosion of that level. So understanding, a lot of people have heard about NAD. Your body, it's natural in your body. Some people do IVs of it. Well, there's a brand new form of NMN which creates that. Now, for people to understand, just real fast, NAD is naturally occurring in your body, and it does 2 things. It triggers things called serotins to clean up your DNA. As you age, your DNA gets altered, right? But it also helps the mitochondria in your body create energy. As you get older and there's more breakdown in the DNA, it's split in its focus. And around 50, our NAD numbers drop by about 50%. So when you need it most, it's gone. So this new form of NMN, it has a technical term for it. Right now, it was just exposed. It was supposed to be a private thing, but the commander talked about it. The Navy SEALs are using it because they took mice in preclinical. Now they're doing it with Navy SEALs. And a young mouse can run about 1 kilometer. An old mouse, like a 60-year-old mouse, most it can run is about 1/4 of a kilometer. They give this new form of NMN to them, and it's crystallized. It doesn't break down. And they run 3 to 5 kilometers at 60-year-old mice. So the commander's so excited about this, supposedly under wraps, he talked to the public, so they're a little upset. But it's coming in 2023, and it's not a supplement. It is literally, they've gone through the drug side so that the purity would be there, she could prove it. So there are things coming these scientists talk about, 80 being the new 60. That kind of rejuvenation of the body. There's a doctor named Dr. Sinclair from Harvard, who's one of the greatest experts in the world. You probably heard about him. And he's on our board as well. And we all age at different speeds. So, I tell people I have a painting down in my basement that's getting really old while I get younger, right? But Dr. Sinclair, you can do your tests, like true age tests. He's 20 years younger than his biological age, or his chronological age, biologically.
And he looks really young.
And his dad is 82 years old. He couldn't even walk. He's losing his cognitive capacity. He's been doing this for 5 years. Now he runs 2 miles at 82 years old, right? He's physically fit. His mind is there. There's a 72-year-old chess player who's now taking this stuff, who's now active and winning at 72 years old, who had cognitive impairment. So a lot of things that we would think someday will happen, you have to understand how much money has been spent by the richest people in the world, especially in Silicon Valley. They want to live forever. And the amount of money that's gone into altering aging, they're seeing aging as a disease now that can be cured. Now, whether it can really be cured, but it's certainly we can reverse the time period. They've proven it for the first time. Some Nobel laureates are doing it. So the book encapsulates what is it that really you can do to increase your energy and strength and vitality, what you can do hormonally, what you can do around major diseases, and what are some of the breakthroughs that could change the quality of your life or the quality of life of someone you love. Because this is a book, most of my books can change people's lives. This is a book I'm so committed to because it's one that can save people's lives. And I'm donating all the benefits to it to Dr. Sinclair and to 4 people in Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, and aging.
I can't wait to read it. That does sound
exciting.
amazing. I've interviewed Dr. David Sinclair.
Have you really?
He's great.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And he looks like 15 years younger than his age.
That's right.
Now, of course, you said 50. I still have like 11 years to go. Christopher, question for you. If bonds can no longer provide meaningful yield, where can investors go kind of during and as we're eventually going to be, I hope, post the pandemic, to find predictable, sizable cash flow that is less correlated? You hinted at this earlier, but maybe we'll go a little deeper into context, and does not come with junk bond risk.
You're right. We did talk about it a little bit earlier, but to expound on it a bit, when you have private credit, you have still fixed income. One of the things that we love more than anything else is buying very profitable businesses, buying stakes in very profitable businesses that are already doing great, but that with growth capital can also grow much faster than they would have been able to without that capital. Then what we have the ability to see is more cash flow from those businesses. Now, not all businesses are set up that way. Some are designed to invest and just grow and grow and grow, and they don't return a lot of that to investors. Tony talked about a few minutes ago about owning asset management firms, private investment firms. Mm-hmm. The capital's locked up. People cannot leave. They have the ability to ride through cycles, the firms themselves do, and they're wildly profitable. Tony, to expand on something they just said, if you have a $3 billion asset management firm and you double it to $6 billion, you do not need twice as many people. Right. It's incredibly efficient. So your operating margins go up dramatically. And it's funny because of the fact that I tell a story that helps illustrate it. And since you pointed out my boots, I'll use it. So imagine if you were a boot maker and you had a customer that had to buy $1 million worth of boots from you every single year. And even if you delivered the wrong boots and the wrong size and the wrong color and the wrong skins, they still had to pay you $1 million. Now that's a good customer. But imagine if you also had in the contract that if you returned the boots to them or you delivered the boots to them in the right size, right color, right shape, etc., they had to pay you an extra $1 million. Now you have a really, really good customer. That is the customer of every private equity, private credit firm. They get the 2% management fee regardless of what happens, even if they don't perform. And if they do perform, they get 20% of the profits on top of it.
Right.
So as owners of that business, and we've invested about $1.5 billion so far owning stakes in some of the very best firms in the world, we get the benefit of that positive cash flow while at the same time getting the upside from the carried interest, the 20%, and also the growth of their business. We have firms that we bought into when they were $7 billion in assets. Now they're 70. Well, needless to say, it's a lot more profitable. And our cash flow is significantly more, and our upside is even better than that. So that's the kind of thing. Obviously, there's other pockets of opportunity in yield, but where one seeks out yield, where one seeks out an outcome, they're going to find it if they look hard enough. And obviously, there's a lot of places to do it, but not in plain vanilla and not where credit spreads where they are or interest rates where they are.
Thank you, Christopher.
If I could comment on that.
Please.
I was on the other side of the table. I was the LP for 25 years. I was investing in private equity firms or private real estate offerings or private credit as an LP, paying 2 and 20. And I tell myself, okay, I'm not a big fan of paying 2% management fees and 20% of the profits. But I was like, AJ, just focus on the net. Don't focus on the fees that you're paying. Focus on the net. And if the net is good, then it takes care of itself. So I did that for 25 years. And then when I spoke with Christopher, when I met him at first, and he started sharing with me, there was an opportunity for, instead of me being a limited partner, I could be shoulder to shoulder with the founding partners of those private equity firms and collect, as he just alluded, the part of the 2% management fee, a part of the 20%, still totally taking exposure to the underlying portfolio. But at the end of the day, when I did well as a limited partner, the general partner did better than me, no matter what.
Right.
So to be on that side of the table, that's a way where I'm able to participate in significantly higher economics without taking more risk.
Looking back, we all wish we could have done this years ago.
You take over. That's what I said. I said, this is the greatest returns I've ever seen in my life. You got the cash flow, and you have the growth in equity, and you get the multiple when you sell the business. I mean, there's all kinds of investments, but it's one of my favorites.
AJ, I'm going to follow up at something that Tony said when I asked him about his book, and it popped in my mind. People of wealth and resources hopefully take care of themselves. They have extra money to do so, to see the best doctors, the best nutrition, trainers, etc. If they're going to start to live healthy and their mind intact, and let's hope so, to 90, 100, 110, maybe longer, this may put unique stresses, even if they're very rich, on their portfolio.
Yeah, so right now, what I've noticed, it's either, I'm trying to figure this out because I'm looking at myself right now. I just turned 50 and I just sold my business. And now, instead of just focusing on the next investment opportunity or focusing on the next big win, I'm focusing saying, how do I take better care of myself? And I feel like longevity is a very popular topic within my friends and my circle. I'm part of the organization called Tiger 21. And when we're getting an outside speaker to come present to us, we don't want to hear about the projections of where the yield curve is going or where the stock market is going or the next private investment. We want to hear from people that are learning about longevity, extending their lifestyles, and being better parents or better husbands. So I feel like there's a little bit of a shift happening, but I must tell you, you still get caught up. I noticed like 2 weeks ago, I was sitting on the couch early Saturday morning, and I was reviewing a deck before my kids woke up. And I was looking at the deck, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And then when I looked up, my daughter was sitting on the dining table eating breakfast by herself. And I was like, what am I doing chasing this next investment opportunity when I could be hanging out with my teenager?
Yes.
I closed the laptop, put it away, went and sat with her. She still ignored me because she was on her technology, but at least I
And she was a
sat with
teenager.
her. Yeah. Exactly. So I think there's a shift happening.
You know, I'm going to add one thing to that.
Please.
You know, people talk so much about the power of compounding, and the power of compounding is amazing in every way possible. But it also can be the most dangerous thing for people because the power of compounding of their expenses, inflationary pressures on their assets. If people expect to live to 85 and they live to 105, they've got that much more of the negative power of compounding of their living expenses to make up for. And that is something that does concern me about people not planning for long enough because, as Tony has articulated, there's so many developments that are going to allow us to live a lot longer. We have to plan for longer.
Absolutely. AJ, you mentioned earlier, and kudos to you, you sold your firm for a substantial amount to a private equity firm. But of course, you're not going to stay idle. You've been too successful and want to keep. So even your own portfolio during COVID and again, hopefully post-COVID, I think you, again, hinted at some of this, but what has changed for you? What are you doing differently?
Well, I guess I'm retired. When I told Tony that I was going to retire, he said, "You're not retiring, you're rewiring," is what he told me. and as my wife always jokes with me, I'm still always on the phone all day long. But she goes, but now you're not bringing home a quarterly distribution or a year-end distribution. And I'm like, well, I'm still having fun. I want to stay in the game. I want to be intelligent with my portfolio. What I've done is, the way I've designed my portfolio, if I shared with you my target allocation, is, and I'll share with you what's changed post, or hopefully post-pandemic or close to it, is right now, my portfolio is 50% target is real estate. And of that 50, 40% is going to be in strong cash flow generating real estate, multifamily, storage facilities, but generating cash flow. The other 10% is either in land, development deals, or opportunistic areas. Like, for example, a year and a half ago, when we're going through the peak of the pandemic, I made some investments that were specialized in hotels. Hotels were selling for almost nothing, and there was some buying opportunities. So that's 50%. The next 25% is allocated towards equities, and it's a global equity portfolio biased towards US, and I've got some MLPs in there, which generate some cash flow. And then the remaining 25, I have 10% earmarked for private equity, and I'm trying to shift from being an LP and going more to the owner side, and that'll take some time, but I'm doing that right now. And 5% is in venture capital. And the other 10, I call it my alternatives bucket. So number one, definitely explosive insurance if the market was to correct. So I'm not worried about a major correction because I know a small portion of my portfolio should offset a decline and give me some dry powder. Another area is life settlements, private credit, and I've got 2-3%, maybe between 3 and 4, depending on the day, allocated towards crypto. And within that crypto, it's like a 80% Bitcoin and 20% Ethereum kind of is the target. So that's my allocation right now.
My audience knows we're going to get to some of that a little bit later, but that's very impressive. I'm going to have to watch this video, take notes, and copy some of what you're doing. Tony, I remember from one of your books, I wrote it down here, hopefully I have it right. Repetition is the mother of skill. What context did you mean that? And more importantly, how does that apply to investing?
Well, I think some people will tell me, I've got 20 years experience at something, and I look at them and go, you got 1 year experience 19 times, Let's be honest. If you grew the first year and you've been doing the same thing for 19 years, and when you do the same thing, you're not a master of anything. If you can ride a market and look really good for the last 20 years, but the world changes. So my whole view is, you need to, if you look at somebody who is extraordinary at anything, and you look at them and say, oh my God, LeBron is so skilled, or Jordan is so skilled, or whoever. I've had a chance to work with some of the most amazing athletes in the world, Tom Brady, whoever. But you see that they're rewarded in public for what they practice in private continuously.
Right.
There's a level of repetition to get to mastery that you don't get anywhere else. And so I'm always looking for what that is. I'm a big believer that success leaves clues. If someone is really successful, not anyone can get lucky, but sustained success over a decade or 2 or 3, if they've lost weight and kept it off for 20 years, if they're in a relationship 20 years in and there's passion and aliveness, not just hanging out, if they've been able to build real wealth and sustain it, because anybody can get wealthy, staying wealthy is different, then what are they doing different? So when I did Money Master the Game, I'm interviewing David Swinson, top guy at Yale. I'm looking at Warren Buffett. I'm working with Paul Tudor, Ray Dalio. I mean, the grouping was unbelievable. And I've looked at them all, and they all had different strategies. Some people are macro, all these different. Some are long-term. Some are value investors. What do they have in common? That's what I'm wondering. What is that they do as consistent habits? Like, what's the principle underneath it that they all do? Is that possible? And there were 4. I call them the core 4 that I found. And they're pretty simple. But the first one blew my mind, and it's one of the reasons that we connected was because his philosophy was the same. The number one thing, when you hear people on CNBC or whatever, they're all talking about where the market's going to go. The smartest people in the world, the Ray Dalios, the Paul Tudors, the Warren Buffett, they'll tell you they don't know where the market's going to go. They have their ideas, and they know they're going to be wrong. So their number one goal, universally, no matter how they invest, is don't lose money. I mean, what's, the Warren Buffett thing? What's rule number 1? Don't lose money. What's rule number 2? See rule number 1, right? And because they know what most investors don't think about. I know these people who run home offices certainly do, that, hey, if you lose 50%, you're not going to have to get 50% to get even. You got to get 100% to get even. People just don't make that clarity in their head. So that's their number one piece. Paul Tudor, for 25, 30 years, whatever it's been we've been working together now, that's his number one. And it's counterintuitive, especially when things are frothy. But that's when you need to make it even more. And then the second principle is asymmetrical risk reward.
Yeah.
Like you think about the wealthiest people in the world and you think they must have taken gigantic risks, and some have, but it's not the majority. The people who take ongoing huge risks, eventually you lose everything. And so how do you not lose money? It's the right asset allocation, right? It's the right philosophy of where you're going to take risk and where you're going to have less risk. And so we talk about that in depth. But the asymmetrical, I mean, a good example of that would be like Kyle Bass. Kyle Bass took $30 million in 2008, and he made $2 billion in 12 months. I don't know many people that pulled that off. And how did he do it? It's like his whole thing, Paul Tudor's thing is 5 to 1. When I first started working with him and he was having some troubles, he had the greatest, one of the greatest trades in history in 1987.
Sure.
Made 40%, made 100% on the year for his people during the biggest drawdown in a single day, 20% drawdown in that day. So his whole thing is, if I'm going to risk $1, I want to make sure that I believe I can make 5. Because I can be wrong 80% of the time and still break even. And so you can't always do that, obviously, but that's the mindset. So what did Kyle Bass do? He saw, the real estate market. He saw it for what it really was. He saw how inflated it was, and he's like, okay, I'm going to invest 6 cents to make $1. I could be wrong 15 times and make money. That's how you take 30 million, go to 2 billion. So, but it's also like Richard Branson's a friend. I got a chance to visit with him a bit. And, when he first started out and decided he's going to take on British Airways, he's going to start his own airway, Virgin. I mean, that's a big risk. And if you know Richard, anybody knows him thinks, oh, he's this giant risk taker. He risked his life. He'll go to space. He'll take a balloon across the world and almost die. But he's not that way in investing. His whole thing is, what's the downside? What's the downside? Right? And then once he predicts the downside, let's give it a go. But his whole thing is protecting the downside. So when he did that, he negotiated with Boeing for 1.5 years before he started the airlines to get them to the point where if he failed, because he knew failure was possible, he didn't want to believe it, but he had to be prepared for it. None of it, he could give all the planes back and have it not affect his credit in any way. So his effective risk was 0. When I asked Kyle Bass, like, how do you teach this to somebody, like a young person? He said, that's a great question, Tony. He goes, I did this with my kids. I asked the same question. Like, how can I teach them the value of asymmetrical risk reward? And he said, so I started asking a question. And I always tell people, questions are the answer. But if you ask a lousy question, you get a lousy answer. How come I'm overweight? Because you're a pig. Let's move on. Right? You got to ask a better question. How can I lose weight and enjoy it? Oh, I could, play squash. You get a better answer. He is a guy that asks questions. So his question was, where in the world is there a riskless return? Now, most people say that's total BS. But Kyle was obsessed about it for more than a year, and he finally found it, nickels. I said, nickels? He goes, yeah, Tony, nickels. You know what I found out? It costs this is back then, 9.6 cents to make a nickel. You wonder why our government's in trouble, right? It costs more than the value of it. He said, the smelt value, we can just take that and I can make money on. He goes, right now, if I buy nickels, on day one, it never goes down. It's always worth a nickel. So there's no risk. But day one, I have a 33% return. I said, yeah, but I've seen the rules. You can't melt U.S. money. He goes, well, that's what they say. But he said, let's look at what they do with pennies. You take those original pennies that were made of whatever percentage copper. I think it was 90%. Now it's like 3% copper. It got changed. It'll eventually happen with nickels because they can't sustain this. And what happened to those pennies that were original copper? They're instantly worth twice as much. Right. He said, so I'm up 33% on day one. So he called the Federal Reserve and how many nickels he bought. He bought all the nickels he could get. He had truckloads of nickels, and he had his kids come and take it all in store. He goes, if I could push one button and convert all my money to nickels, he said, I'd do an heartbeat. I have no risk. I'm up 33%. I'm probably up 100%. So it's his way of explaining you got to practice this principle when you can. Obviously, not every investment has that opportunity, but you want a certain segment of that. And so that focus has changed my economic life. And then the third one is tax efficiency. You don't start with that or you're an idiot. You don't make your investments based on taxes. But when we first got together, what's the first thing I'd say to him? He said, well, the returns, I said, bullshit. Tell me the net. Don't tell me these gross returns. Tell me after fees. I want to know what's real. That's what's spendable. And so tax efficiency is critical, but not until you first make sure you've covered the downside, you've got the right asset allocation, hopefully you've got some asymmetric risk reward, and then what's the structure that can make that work wherever you can? Not only of assets or asset classes, but across timelines, across countries. And so if you look at those four and then add to it tail risk, because without the tail risk, like that 3 to 5% of my portfolio, everything go down, I got 10 times my return on that investment, or I get nothing if I do that kind of a structure. Now, you put a structure together that has less return but great protection, and I don't lose anything. It's not like the insurance goes away. That's the part I love. In the next few weeks, April 15th is coming, And he said all these people have not thought about the benefit they've gotten and that there's a taxability on that short-term return that's normal, ordinary income. And they're not planning for it. So they're going to have to liquidate those assets to pay the taxes. Plus, we got a new SEC guy coming in, and he's going to change the rules possibly, and China wants to put a stop to this. He said the next few weeks, he said, I think you're going to see it drop, and I think there's going to be a buying opportunity. And boy, was he right. And his view now, I spoke to him the other day, is he thinks that we're about to see another growth because we made it through China. All the things he said would happen were true. Right. China's come and tried to destroy it, hasn't destroyed it. The Fed's coming out, making moans about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and still hasn't changed much. I should say the SEC, not the Fed. And you have that profit taking and the people who pay taxes, and you've seen it grow again. So he believes in this last quarter, because it's institutionalized now and because you need a protection against inflation, that you're going to see larger institutions taking a percentage of their assets in this final quarter. And he thinks there might be a nice correction in the next 2 weeks. I spoke to him 2 days ago. And he also looks at he says Bitcoin for a store of value. But, you look at, Ethereum and Solana are creating a technology for usability and speed.
For sure.
And so he looks at that as kind of a 40-30-30 in his view. And then, if you talk to even Ray, who wasn't for Bitcoin, saying, oh, maybe 5% Bitcoin now. And Paul in his accounts have 5, and for personally, it's more like 10. So again, that's a tail risk view. It could go through nothing, but it also could protect you on all your other assets if it explodes. I'm covered that if there's a 50% down draw, I'm okay. If I'm wrong, I'm okay. How do I have enough in asymmetrical risk reward? And I've got a series of those things, but one of my favorites is private equity firms, obviously. And then what do I do so I can do that in the most, tax efficient way? And then how do I diversify enough? And then how do I have tail risk? If I put those components together, that's the principles that then you design your asset allocation for, based on working with some of the smartest people on the face of the earth financially, much smarter than I.
Tony, are you sure that your calling in life was not to be a Greenwich hedge fund manager? Come on, join the club. And it warms my heart, everyone, to hear Tony mention Solana, which happens to be my personal of the bigger brand cryptos, if I could loosely call it that I have the most interest in.
Yeah, it went from $42 a month ago, if you're not following it, to $260 or $227. I think it's $157 today. $216, I think it was a week ago. And
wow, you really follow it.
Well, when Paul Tudor tells me something, I pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, my main foray recently into crypto, and I've been very active in it, is that white paper that Paul and I believe his chief economist wrote, which really wasn't that long ago, June, I believe, of 2020. Yeah. And it made me really, I'm an older guy. I'm like, what's this thing that I can't see, feel, and touch? And it really opened up my mind. And since then, my audience knows I put in over 500 hours into it. I've spoken to, from Michael Saylor to so many different people. And I'm extremely interested and active in the space, but do understand it's asymmetrical.
That's right.
I want to be careful. If something were to happen, I'll have a glass of wine, I'll be disappointed, but it's not going to ruin my day.
That's why I say I look at Bitcoin more as tail risk, like a 5%, maybe 10% max type of a piece there, because who knows? Nobody really knows. But if you're going to bet, what are you going to do to protect yourself from inflation besides real estate?
For sure. And a word to our audience that's live today, we do want to make this immersive and have a chance to take some of your questions. If you could shoot them in, we have very big 30-foot screens here. Over the next final hour or so, I should be able to weave a couple of them in. Christopher, we're going to switch over to you. One common theme we're seeing more and more of is the prevalence of high-growth technology companies and the rocket fuel that they provide to an investor's portfolio. What are you doing to take advantage of these disruptive technologies?
So I'll answer that question, but I want to do what Tony asked me to, which was to talk about CalPERS a little bit. CalPERS is a great organization. This is not saying anything negative about them, but they had a very high-profile mistake. For almost 7 years, they had a tail hedging program in place. And ultimately, what they were not able to do was to stay with that insurance program. They canceled it in January, literally, of 2020. And they missed out on $1 billion opportunity of profit from that hedging program. Wow. But not only was it the $1 billion that they missed out on, but think about going back to what AJ said, which is you have $1 billion now to go buy stuff that's really cheap. So when everybody else is a seller, you can be a buyer. And so that's the reason why it's important to have a program in place that you can stick with and not have to give up just simply because you get tired of paying a premium, so to speak, like we do every day on our car or home. So back to your question on technology. Technology.
Tell them how you've addressed that, though.
Say it again.
Please tell them how you addressed that, because that's why I brought it to you.
It's something to where when you talk about, most people don't mind paying for their insurance on their home, and they certainly don't mind paying for insurance on their life. I don't know anybody, Tony, who says, today I want to cash in on my life insurance policy. Yeah. They do not say that. So they don't mind just paying premium and having it go away. But nobody looks at their stock portfolio the same way. But they do it on every other aspect of their life. They have an alarm system for their home. They have a business insurance. They have liability insurance, but they don't on their stock portfolio. And the reason is that it's just a different mindset. And so what we did, and we spent about 8 months trying to figure this out, is a way to create effectively a way for people to have the insurance, but have it not cost them anything. Well, it wasn't easy. It's still not easy, and it's not bulletproof. There's no guarantees in life. But by putting together the very best managers that specialize in this area to where you can have some generating cash flow that can be used to pay for the premium, to where hopefully in a normal year you don't have it cost you anything. Yeah. Maybe you make a little bit, maybe you lose a little bit, but then when the market does really correct, you have that positive asymmetric return. That's where that comes from.
And the best part is when that happens, you have the market's gone down, you get all your cash, and now you can buy at pennies on the dollar, and you got the cash for it, right? You didn't take the loss. So to me, that's the brilliance of this.
That's correct. That's correct. And it's something to where you can go. Because one of the things we hear about technology all the time, which is totally valid, is that, wait a second, isn't technology expensive? Everything's expensive. Right. There's nothing that's cheap really out there. But inside of technology, if you can overcome valuation discrepancies by truly finding disruptive technology that is going to change industries or methodologies or the way that things are done, the valuation you bought in may have been a little bit high, but if it still performs well, you're going to do incredibly well. The problem is, back to AJ's analogy, if you're hearing about it in the locker room, it is not supposed to be something you're investing in. If it's gotten there, it's been passed on by all the very best in the world. So you have to find a way to get access to the very best that exist in venture capital. We don't have a chart for this or a slide for it, but simply stated, the performance differential between the very best in venture capital and those that are not the best is the widest of any asset class. So you have to be in the top tier managers. The problem is they're full. And it's very difficult for the average investor to get access to something like that because they're not writing a $100 million check or a $500 million check. So you have to find ways to get to the very best somehow in a way that's aligned, and then participate in the growth of the next technology revolution, which, just like health, it's, our world is changing every day. We need to participate in that.
Coastal is a perfect example of that, because we work together on so many things. But you've really provided access in ways, opportunities that even I haven't been able to get access to any other way. And that's why I look at this firm as CAS. It's like providing RIAs with exclusive opportunities they can't get anywhere else. And then tell them your philosophy, just because this is the part that blew me away. You created that irresistible offer, coming out of Business Mastery. Share them what you do.
So I didn't say it in the intro, but I've said this publicly many, many times. But other than my wife, of the people walking on the face of this earth, nobody's had more influence on my life than him.
No, I wasn't asking for that.
Oh, I understand that. You weren't, but I'm going to give it anyway because of the fact that it's true. So I started, back almost about the same time as AJ. I started listening to Tony's teachings in 1991. And this firm exists because of a goal that Lisa, my wife, and I set in December of 1991 to have a firm by the name of CAS Investments within 10 years, and 9 years and 9 months later, we had the firm. That's not an accident. But so as part of going through his programs, I went to Business Mastery. Business Mastery has an irresistible offer. It is an expensive program, but it will have a revolutionary change on your business and potentially on your life, which it certainly did for me. But so Tony's irresistible offer is, if after the first day, and correct me if I misspeak this, after the first day, if you don't see $1 million of value, you get all your money back, no questions asked. Well, that's a pretty good investment. That's a good asymmetric return. So I did that, and while I'm sitting there, Tony challenged us to come up with an irresistible offer for our business. And so when I looked at it, I said, how do we get aligned with our investors completely? So in most cases, not all, but in most cases, we don't charge any management fees at all. We just get paid a percentage of the profits. So we've got over $400 million of our own money invested in our own vehicles, and we don't get paid unless there's a profit. It means we're aligned. Doesn't mean it's going to work, but it means we're totally aligned. And that's why we've done what we've done, which is why the ecosystem's gotten as big as it's gotten, which is how we can get access to things that even billionaires can't get access to.
And by the way, just for everybody, because we're all business people out here, one of the things, I learned this originally, I've seen it from multiple people, but the first time I got this simple principle was Tony Hsieh, who just recently passed away. He's the gentleman who created Zappos.
Sure.
And I remember, I'm always digging into, I have access to some of those brilliant minds. Okay, tell me, and I'm a big believer that things can be chunked into threes. Most people's brains go 1, 2, 3, many. So, if there's only 3 things to grow a business, there's only 3 things to expand. And I had this conversation with Tony. He said, I'll tell you exactly what happened at Zappos. He said, I didn't start it. These 3 guys did. They were going broke in San Francisco. In 2000, they decide we're going to sell shoes to women online. Sounds nice, but it's going bankrupt. Why? Well, you got the right audience. Women love shoes, but the offer is terrible. The offer is buy 20 pairs of shoes, pay the shipping, pay for the shoes, try them on at home. If they don't fit, pay to ship them back, and we'll refund if they don't fit. Well, they were going broke. So he said, you only need 3 things. He said, number one, and this is what I teach everybody now, and I've done it, I have 105 companies now, so in all these industries, from AI to my place in Fiji to sports teams, every single company, I start with this fundamental with a team. Who is our ideal client? Not who's our client. Who's the client that's going to love you, is going to stay with you, is going to refer business, when the market's down through the floor, is going to still want to work with you? Who is that client? What do they want? What do they need? What are their wounds? What are their pains? Because you want to fall in love with your client, not your product or service. Products and services change so fast now. But if you fall in love with your client and you know what they really need better than they even know, now all you need is step 2, an irresistible offer. And he said to them, you got the right client. Women love shoes. For women, shoes are happiness. Men, there's a mixture. His boots might be the exception. I don't know. You're looking pretty hot with those 2. But the bottom line, most men's shoes, is not that big a deal. For women, one shoe, I'm one woman, another shoe, I'm another woman. Women will share this with you. They cheer when I talk about this, right? So he said, you got the right client, but your offer's terrible. He goes, what should it be? He said, how about this? Buy as many shoes as you want, 20 pairs. We will pay the shipping to you. Try them on and convenience your home. Any you don't like, we will pay the shipping back. Now, if you're an investor in this company and you hear this offer, you go, you're insane. We're going to go bankrupt. There's no way. There's not enough margin. He said, see, you don't understand who your client is. Because women get these shoes. And I ask women all these seminars all the time, how many got shoes that don't really fit, but they're so beautiful, you think they will in the future, and you keep them. And they all laugh and raise their hand, right? And so guess what? The company was sold 7 years later to Amazon for $1.2 billion, and Tony stayed on because he'd made plenty of money. He just wanted to keep the culture alive. Yeah. So the third step I add to it is over-deliver and do more than what you promised. So if you know who your ideal client is, you create an irresistible offer, change your business, change your offer, change your life. There are companies built on it. Some of you are old enough to remember Columbia House. Are you old enough to remember Columbia House?
Unfortunately, I am.
Some of you may not be, but they used to have this thing, for a dime or $1, you got 10 albums, or 10 CDs.
Used to tape the penny
That's
in
right.
the envelope.
They had all that crap. But then they turned $1 billion company, and guess who copied them? Steve Jobs. He said, how do I create an irresistible offer? And what did he do? He made, you don't have to buy the whole thing, just the song for 99 cents. He changed the entire industry. Groupon is an entire company that doesn't have a product. They just have everybody's best offers. So when you change your offer, you change your life. And so when Christopher starts showing people, A, the sophistication of what he's created and the access, but B, the fee structure, they look at us, don't they, AJ, that's not possible.
What's the catch?
Yeah, what's the catch?
Yeah.
There is no catch. The catch is massive growth. He grew his business 100%. What, in 2 years, 3 years?
We've grown 5x in 5 years.
Wow, 5x in 5 years. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Kudos. That's amazing. AJ, are you practicing what you've preached for 25 years in terms of portfolio rebalancing? As an example, when something in a portfolio, a specific allocation goes up, do you ride that, or do you say, I must show discipline, liquidate, and rebalance my portfolio? Is it that black and white, or it's more gray?
So what I did for a very long time, I was extremely disciplined, and I was rebalancing. And it's kind of hard because when you're rebalancing, you're kind of selling your winners, which you love, and you're adding to the losers, which at that moment you don't really like too much. So what I've been doing right now is, number one, I'm reassessing my target asset allocation. The worst time to reassess your target allocation is when we're going through a crisis. Because at that point, you're like, I want to have zero equities and zero risky assets. I want 100% cash. Not the right time to be reassessing your target. But when things are right now, where things are good and people are feeling good, I'm reassessing my target. But one thing that I've done that's different, so I am rebalancing, but one thing that I'm doing different is there's so much embedded gains in my equities right now. And I'm thinking, God, I should sell some of these equities right now. But if I sell them, I'm going to pay capital gain taxes. And I'm a firm believer, don't let the tail wag the dog. But if I don't sell them, I save some money in taxes. So what I've done with that little bit of savings right now, I'm a little bit overweight equities. And technically, I should probably come down a little bit. And I have, but not to where I should be. And I know where I should be. But what I've done with that tax savings is I've bought some insurance. I've literally bought some insurance with my portfolio. And one more piece that I'm doing right now is I am doing some covered calls, out of the money covered calls. So collecting premium. And what I'm doing with that premium is I'm adding it towards the insurance piece. So I feel that I've rebalanced it, but not exactly the way I normally would have before, because I do have the insurance now.
That's an excellent answer. Tony, I'm going to ask you kind of a personal question from my side. So my son just started college 2 weeks ago, and he's liking it better than high school. And I told him this statement. I've said this before, and it gets me nasty emails and stuff, but why not? Many, even great colleges, don't create winners. They pick winners. The Ivy Leagues, the best of the best SATs. Many great winners like you didn't attend an Ivy League school. Do you think parents might be better served investing that money or that savings in the child's entrepreneurial endeavors, investing portfolios in crypto and digital assets?
Well, I think you have to think about what it is that, I hate to call them a child when they're an adult going to college, but for us, they probably feel like our kids still, they are. I think you have to look at what it is. If they're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, if there's going to be some form of profession where they need that university education, then obviously you're going to have to make that investment, even though that investment a lot of times doesn't make sense. If they're going to be an art major, it might be worth reevaluating, right? It depends on what their future is. But I think the biggest mistake we make in this last few decades is assuming we should put all our kids through college. Now, easy for me to say I didn't go to college. It's not that I don't value it. It's just I value the years I got in the real world instead. So I put myself on the line starting in business when I was 17. So I got a real education, but I also wanted a different outcome. So I don't think you can universally say it's one or the others. There's a network that can come from some of these universities that's priceless. There's experiences. But I think you got to evaluate now the risk return. There really isn't. I just read a statistic the other day. I think it's now, if I remember correctly, 73% of kids that go to college do not ever go to work in the thing they majored in. And they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and often creating debt. The other thing is, I don't believe that parents should fund all that, no matter how much money you have, because I just don't think the child values it. Now, some do, but I just think it's really important that they're vested in that future, because a lot of kids go and they party and they come out of there and go, I can't find anything. They haven't built the grit and the muscle. So for my kids, I didn't just pay for it. I provided support for them, but they had to work. Even when they went to prep school, my son Josh, I really said, okay, here you went to Switzerland to Le Rosé, which is one of the most incredible schools. You can fly to, they take kids to Egypt and they spend the night in the pyramids. I mean, they got, the king of Oman's son was his roommate at one point, So I said, you're not going to be spoiled rotten like this. You're going to work during the summer and I'm going to provide a budget for you. Of course, he busted that. He's watching, I'm sure, right now. So here it is. But the point is, I think there's got to be a part of earnings if they go there. I've got to work. I've got to learn to manage my life and my studies, because in real life, you're going to have to manage a lot of things. I think if you don't at least do that, you're doing your young person a disservice. But I also think you got to see what their skills are, where they are, and is there something else that they can get that it's experience-based. The old experience was being, mentoring by somebody who was a great craftsman or a great leader. I think that's been lost. And for me, that is how I've grown. In my life, I went and found who's the best. Let me go get access. In the early days, I'll be their janitor to be around them, literally, when I was a kid. But I want to learn everything they can know. And I think we've lost that into this formal education that also in some schools now is an indoctrination process under a whole philosophy of wokeness. And whether, I'm personally into awake versus woke. Woke is all about the past. And listen, we all have past and they're all injustices. I've been through them. Everybody's been through some form of them. but that doesn't make your life better. You know, being awake is what's my responsibility now and what can I do? So I'm interested in my kids not being indoctrinated. I'm interested in them discovering what they really want to do with their life, finding the finest skills possible, but feeling a certain amount of pressure, not just pressure to perform and regurgitate what they've learned, but a pressure to think for themselves.
I've interviewed Michael Saylor, who I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
You went to MIT. What did you learn? On my first day, I realized the importance and the number one value of college to him was thinking for yourself.
That's great.
And apparently a lot of people just follow advice they may get from a doctor, a professional, and think that that's like rock solid.
You got to think for yourself and hopefully not get people to think only one dimension about color, about race, about finance, about your health. I mean, you know, on the medical side, because I'm writing this book, do you know what the half-life of medical education is today, according to Harvard? 2 years. That means your entire medical education, 2 years later, half of it is out of date. And so now you're going to have to get educated by who? It's usually the drug people, right? Because they're the ones coming in and educating you because there's not enough time. Like doctors work their guts out. They're some of the best humans I know. But, you know, it's imagine you're walking by a riverbank and you hear someone screaming and you're a doctor and so you see someone's there. You don't think about yourself. You jump in to save them. And you drag them out and give them mouth-to-mouth survive. And the minute you finish, 2 more screams. You jump in, save both of them, 4 more screams. You don't have time to go upstream to see who's throwing them in. And so that's the kind of thinking that I think is critical in finance. If a subject is your finance, your body, your health, your philosophy around God or the universe, right, or raising your children, these are areas where you want coaches, but you better decide because they could be sincere people and be sincerely wrong. Better you make the mistake so you can own it and fix it if it doesn't work than just blindly listen to anybody. I don't believe in that. I believe in, that's why I like just diversification of assets. I go to diversification of teachers. When I went and did the financial book, 50 different people who are the best in the world, right? All self-made billionaires, nobody from the Lucky Sperm Club, right? Same thing in the health area. 100 of the greatest regenerative doctors on the face of the earth is who I've interviewed. Not 2 that told me what to believe. And I think that's a critical philosophy. You want to succeed in business, finance, emotion, relationship, or anything that matters.
I think that's great advice. I did promise the audience I would occasionally, at minimum, go to some of their questions. And Christopher, you're going to get the first one. It looks like from Brian, what is the insurance they have purchased that they keep talking about? If you could dive a little deeper into that.
So we won't go too deep on that, and certainly we can provide more context offline in direct conversations. But in a general context, you know, portfolio insurance has been around for a very, very long time. There's lots of different ways to protect oneself in the stock market if one knows how to do it. So the simplest example would be, you know, buying puts on the S&P 500. Anybody can do that, but if you don't know what you're doing, the market can be a very expensive educational environment. So that's an example, though, of what can be done. When we shorted subprime mortgages in 2007, you referred to Kyle Bass just a few minutes ago. Our partner in that was John Paulson. And, you know, that was CDS, credit default swaps on you know, CDOs, and anybody who's seen The Big Short knows, you know, more details about that. But it was a fascinating time. That's a way to buy insurance. When we shorted subprime in 2007, we did it because we believed that the housing bubble was going to burst. We'd been to neighborhoods just like the one you described earlier, AJ, and there were ghost towns, and we saw that there was going to be just a complete train wreck. But we also knew that if that happened, it was probably going to take the rest of the economy, you know, to its knees. Not necessarily as bad as it turned out to be. We didn't see that coming, but we knew that it was going to be a significant problem for the markets. So by shorting subprime, we also got the benefit of a hedge, a protection on our portfolio. Today, the same thing exists. Whether somebody believes the market correction is going to be in 2 months, 2 years, or 2 weeks, it doesn't really matter. If you have protection against that, and then the market does correct, you not only are right on your thesis, but you're also going to have a tremendous amount of protection for the rest of your portfolio, and as we said earlier, be a buyer when everybody else is a seller. So that's the high level, and then we can talk to people privately in more detail.
And AJ, I'm going to throw one of the questions at you, which I think is a good one. They're asking about metals, palladium, uranium. I'm going to throw in gold, copper, etc. Does that deserve to be a part of a portfolio? What bucket would that fit into, and what percentage of an allocation?
Yeah, so I'm having that conversation with people, and we've looked at metals and gold and silver as an inflation hedge over the years. And now all of a sudden people are saying, well, I want to own real estate or I want to own crypto as a combination. Our thoughts are there's still room in your portfolio of having some gold and silver. But I do believe right now, when I look at gold, I'm thinking, you know what, you can keep digging gold. As prices go up, more people are going to go down and dig more gold and create a higher supply. But something like, which it took me a little while to come around to crypto, but having a small allocation to crypto could be a really nice inflation hedge and a complement to a small allocation to commodities like gold or silver or palladium.
I'll stay with you. You built strong relationships with many advisors around the country. How are they advising their ultra high net worth clients, and what is their biggest frustration?
Yeah, so right now, as I'm speaking with my friends at various firms around the country, number one is the clients have significantly higher expectations on rates of return on their portfolio. They are asking, can we do more technology? Can we lean in more? Can we be more aggressive? They have retired investors that need income from the portfolio calling them and saying, you know what, let's get rid of those dividend-paying, income-generating equities and go more into the NASDAQ QQQs. And I know it's paying almost no income or no income at all, but I'll just take it from the growth. And that concerns me if you're focusing on income and counting on it from coming from appreciation only. I'd like the regular cash flow coming in. So investors have higher expectations. And at the end of the day, these advisors, they're in the business of maintaining and retaining assets under management. They have assets under management, they charge an advisory fee. So what do they want to do? They want to keep their clients, they want to attract new clients. And they are having difficulties identifying unique alternative investments. Like the last thing an ultra high net worth investor wants to hear from an advisor is, hey, I've got the KKR Fund 92 that's available. They're charging 2.20. I know you can get it anywhere you want, but here it is. I'm going to charge you a 1% management fee, and you're going to be tied up for 10 years with the whole terms. So they're a little bit confused right now also. And so they're just kind of, some of them are really trying to educate their clients, and some are just following the wave, saying, okay, when this collapses, I'll just go rebuild my practice and get new clients because everybody will be firing their advisors.
And Tony, I'm going to ask you a question, another one that I like to think about. It's going to be decision-making and games a little bit. So you have chess. You got to make critical decisions quickly, but is it realistic? I see what you got, you see what I got, and we're limited in terms of how we can move. I still think chess is a great game. But poker, where some luck is involved, where I don't necessarily see what you have, I can make some educated guesses, so I need to make a strategic decision very quickly. There's a decent chance I may be wrong, and I have to adapt my decision making quickly and not be stuck in blind spots, confirmation bias, and ego. How do we avoid that? Because if we're having some success, we may all have a little bit of those three negative things.
Well, there's all kinds of cognitive biases, you know. We don't need to go through them all. I'm sure everybody here knows them. I think the most important thing is what AJ talked about, is making those decisions in advance, because I always tell people, you know, losers react, leaders anticipate. If you anticipate various scenarios and you decide when you're not under pressure what to do, you're going to be much better off than waiting till that time. I think the second thing is just reminding yourself that a lot of what's happened in your life is grace. That, you know, there's sometimes the timing just worked for you. There's so many people I see in business especially that think they're just king, and they've just really rode a trend. They were fortunate enough to get in the front of a trend, and they got the benefit of it. And I think if your ego gets there, you're in deep trouble, because that's what the market does. It'll smash your ego. It's only a matter of time before it is. I don't care who you are. I've worked with some of the greatest financial traders in the history of the world. They will all tell you the stories of what happened with, including Ray Dalio in the early days, where they were just crushed. They were completely wrong. That's why most people, some of the smartest people in the world, are terrible investors. This is like Ray's description to me. And it's like, why is that? He said, because they want to know everything about something before they decide. Well, by the time you know everything about it, the opportunity's gone. So his description of investing, by the way, is gambling. He said, and the problem is the average investor is never going to do that, because it's much more intense than, let's say, the Olympics, where people spend 4 years to get to the point for that moment to fight against the best. The people that are running these markets are the smartest poker players on the face of the earth, and they still get taken. So what you really got to say is, how do I put together an asset allocation when I'm not stressed, that anticipates these stresses and says, when that happens, this is what I'm going to do, so that you don't wait till the emotion is there. Whether it's ego or fear, it doesn't matter. Both of them, greed or fear, they take people over. I have to have something that's beyond the emotions that I've set up that I know is going to win. And in my case, I always ask myself, what are you investing for? And the answer people give you is always crazy. Well, greater assets. No, assets go up and down. It's income. In the end, income is the only thing that matters. Income is what makes your life go. So I want to make sure I have plenty of income, which I do, but then I have plenty of room that if the asset values of things I invest in go up or down, it doesn't affect my life. So my worst case scenario, I'm prepared for it. Then you're not making decisions under pressure. Decisions under pressure, some people are really good at it. I'm pretty decent at it because I've been in a lot of stressful situations in my life. But not everybody has that experience, and not everybody's developed that muscle. And even someone's good at it, better to make the decision where you're not under that pressure, in my opinion. But that's also why, like those 4 core principles I told you about, and really putting myself in a position where I'm protected. Like you described, most people think life insurance is a necessity if you care about your family. You know, my home insurance is a necessity. Why don't you have insurance on your portfolio? Are you really that smart? Ray Dalio doesn't think he's that smart. Right? He's pretty smart. Paul Tudor doesn't think he's that smart. They all have a form of insurance. So I think that may be the most important thing at a time now where cash is trash because of inflation, where bonds are pretty much worthless, and where the market's at 100-year highs. That's why we've got to do 2 things. Find alternative investments, see what the impact is. Look at it for yourself on charts. Maybe they can put one up for you later and just show you the radical difference between what you see from private equity versus the S&P versus bonds. And obviously you need a mixture of things, but it's a different universe. If they put the chart up, there's one that shows like over 20 years of, I think the market is like 10% over 15 years, and it's like 13.3 on alternative investments. But you look at that compounded 33% more per year over 10, 15, and 20 years, $1,000 is $126,000, I think, remember there was, versus, let's say, $36,000 on the S&P versus $8,000 on bonds. So I think you have to look at the world you're in, anticipate what's going on, and put your plan in place so that when the thing happens, you just do it. If you have to think about it at that point, you're probably not going to be at your best.
I'm glad you brought up inflation, because that's going to be my next question for Christopher. For the kind of families that I deal with in Family Office Association, incredibly affluent, some of them, I'm not saying all, but some of them want to buy more stocks that are going up drastically. Cryptos, which are going up beyond what we could believe. Art, homes in Malibu, in London, in Miami, football teams. These are not going up 3 or 4%. So I've gotten in trouble, and many people disagree with me, but I'm like, listen, I'm looking at your spending habits, including what you want to buy more of, and in my opinion, you're investing too conservatively, and over, maybe not in a year or 2, but over 10 or 20 years, your purchasing power is really going to go down. How do you balance investing aggressively enough while also mitigating risk?
Yeah, it's such a tug of war that investors of all generations have had. At the end of the day, if I don't lose money, I've got what I had, but inflation's going to eat its purchasing power. So how do I invest in a way that I can feel comfortable? How do I invest in a way that's going to give me that opportunity to make the return I need to keep up with inflation? And as anybody right now will agree, I think on this event, what we hear from the government about inflation is a lot different than what I'm experiencing every day.
Yep.
Okay, it is a lot higher inflation out there, whether you talk about wages, whether you talk about cost of cars or homes or anything, it's a heck of a lot higher. Now, what that means is that we have to be sure that we can invest wisely. We don't want to chase just the next hottest thing because it's just going to grow forever. But at the same time, having a good plan in place, with both Tony and AJ have talked about, where you know exactly what you're going to do when the stress happens, it allows you to invest with a lot more confidence. So if you, as an example, get in your car and you drive to your workplace and you have an accident, that's not going to be fun. But if you got in the car knowing that you are going to have something that pays for your car if you had an accident, then you feel better about getting in your car and you don't become a hermit, live in your home all the time. So the same is true in investing. If you want to participate in the technology revolution, which we talked about earlier, it sure is nice knowing that there is a protection in place against potentially a major correction of the market for reasons that none of us may be able to predict. If you have that protection, if you have that plan, you can invest wisely and not have to just stick money in cash or bonds where you're not going to make any money. So that gives you the ability to earn an overall higher rate of return and have a lower level of risk, which is the, Ray Dalio gets so much credit for, of creating an all-season portfolio, something that can withstand the test of all types of scenarios.
I am not looking, AJ, to necessarily challenge the benefits of being diversified. I think it is pretty obvious, but I'm going to push back a little bit. Okay. It's always been taught to get rich, you need to be concentrated. Tony put his effort in building a company that created his wealth. Tudor Jones and many other entrepreneurs. But to stay rich, you do need to be diversified. Where I could flip that a little bit was my question to Christopher is, if they become too diversified, too conservative, what's going to happen to their purchasing power?
Yeah, so the way I look at that is depending on what stage of life you're at. So for example, Forbes did a study where they said, how do people get on the Forbes 400 list? And the answer was overwhelming. They had concentration in a company or they had concentration in real estate and they got on the Forbes 400 list. And then they did another study and they said, how did people fall off the Forbes 400 list after being on the Forbes 400 list? And it was concentration, concentration in one asset class. So one way I look at it is if you're in the accumulation mode, I could see for myself. I put a lot of my time, effort, and energy in my business that I was building, and I didn't really realize it then, but I had significant amount of concentration in my business, even though I was trying to diversify with my outside portfolio. So I think a lot of the people that I talk to is, and where I'm leaning towards now, is I do believe that diversification does make sense, but not being overly diversified, because you've probably heard this, diversify versus diversify. And when you've got a whole bunch of asset classes and investments just to have investments, that doesn't make sense. If you're going to diversify your portfolio, you want to make sure that you have some non-correlating assets, that when one investment is zigging, the other one is zagging.
And by the way, that's what Ray Dalio doesn't teach, just to diversify. He's saying find these non-correlated assets that you really believe have value. And for most people, they just can't think of 8 to 10 or 12 of them. But that's why alternative investments are so important, because they're out there. Just if your mindset is it's stocks and bonds, you can probably get by with that. And now you're probably going more stocks than bonds for your clients. But then when the liquidation happens, you're going to lose a lot of those clients. So that's why being able to have some alternative investments, so there is that formula that Ray talks about that reduces your risk 80% and gives you more upside. And then also having the tail risk as well. It's like the combination of that, there's no guarantee of anything, but it's probably the most secure you can have. It's like the whole 60-40 is dead, but 90-10 or 80-20 is danger. So it's like you can get 80-20 or less, take that 20 you're doing on bonds and move it in some other categories of alternative investments and put some insurance in there. I can keep more now in the market, even though it may be overvalued. We don't know. No one knows for sure, but it's certainly at highs. I can stay there knowing that if it goes down, I'm okay. And I'll just be able to take that money and buy at a cheaper price point back in the market. That's a pretty cool feeling, as opposed to, well, let's just keep going for chasing what we think is going to be the equity return or the income return. Either way, it's pretty hard to find the income return outside of private credit.
Tony, what's a work accomplishment that makes you proud?
Holy cow. Well, I'm a pretty egotistical guy, I guess, because lots of things make me proud. Ego pride is usually when you're making something up to make yourself feel good. I'm proud of the, literally hundreds of millions of people I've had the privilege to work with. I've had more than, people that I could ever dream of that I've had a chance to work with. I've worked with 6 presidents, all the living presidents and past ones. I've worked, only 3 presidents have been impeached. I've worked with 2 of them at the time they were in it. But I think really, suicide is a pretty rough thing. And right now with these lockdowns, it's gone crazy. I just read in Australia, I was looking at some of the numbers, and in 2018, 1,200 people died of the flu in Australia. In the last 20 months, 993 have died of COVID, but they shut the entire country down. So in the last 60 days, 60 people have died of COVID, but 500 have died of suicide. And young people, 1 in 4, according to the CDC, has considered suicide during the last year. That's insane. And I'm fortunate enough, knock on wood, I haven't lost them. I've worked with thousands over the years. If anybody wants to see my work, you can go to Netflix and they have a documentary called Tony Robbins, I'm Not Your Guru. And you'll see me in real time. There's a documentary showing doing it. And then we follow up and you see them 4 years later turned around. So there are principles that I've been able to create around human influence that are able to help people. So I think suicides, helping children turn around, they're addicted to drugs, growing businesses to the extent we have. I have 105 companies now. We're doing almost $8 billion in business, and they're diversified businesses. And some of them I started, some I was an early investor, some I'm a partner in. But the diversity of what I get to do excites me. So I'm thrilled by that. But what makes me go is seeing people's lives change. That's why I still do what I do. I still spend most of my time in that category, and it never gets old. And like this facility, I'm proud of that. Instead of just shutting down, saying, no, there's a way to reach people. Now I see people in their homes. Like we can look out right here, and I see this gentleman with his cowboy hat on, this man in his suit. These are smaller. I make them a little bigger so I can read their names normally. But it's nice to see you guys. But I can watch them in real time, and I can see where they are, and I meet their children and their kids. And so the level of impact I've been able to do and reach more people, I'm proud that I just give that up. So I think becoming resilient, teaching resiliency and living resiliency may be the most important skill you can give your kids, you can give yourself, you can give your business. Because in the end, everything's going to be tested. In the end, there's a season to everything, right? There's the times when it's springtime and it's all going well and you think you're a genius. And then there's the hot summer where you're working twice as hard and you don't seem to result. And then there's fall, you get all these rewards. And then there's winter again. And I think those seasons happen in 20-year cycles economically, if you study history, but they also happen in our lives at different stages. And so what I'm most proud of is that I'm still standing here at 61, having started when I was 17, and that for 44 years, you don't have to see how my mouth moves. You can see how my feet and body and results have moved for 4+ decades to touch people's lives. And it's a privilege, and I feel like there's a lot of grace in that. That I didn't have anything to do with. And then there's unbelievable amount of dedication and hard work. And the combination of those three create a life you can be proud of, in my opinion. But what makes me most proud is contribution, seeing the impact, both in what I get to do for a living, but also, I planted 71 million trees. I got a BBJ, and it's like, okay, I don't want to burn all this fuel. What am I going to do here? But I want this for my family because I travel so much. Okay, I found out it was 3,000 trees. I said, screw that, I plant 100 million. So I've done 71 million trees. I'm going to feed 1 billion people. I'm going to feed 1 billion people externally. I've funded 25,000 children being saved from slavery. I've gone on those trips undercover myself and seen what's happened. And so I go on and on. All of those things make your life feel meaningful, because in the end, what you get is not going to make you happy. How long when you get something you're happy for? A year? Some big goal? Not usually. 6 months, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 hours. What makes us happy is growing and giving. If you're growing, you feel alive. Even if you're not where you want to be, if you're making progress, I always tell people progress equals happiness. If you're making progress, you're going to feel alive. And if you're making progress and you're growing, you have something to give. And what makes life meaningful, it's not always perfectly happy, but what makes it meaningful is to feel like your life serves something more than yourself. And I know many of the wealthiest people and many of the heads of offices that work with them know that there are people out there, probably your client has done something. They've done something to add more value than anybody else in their marketplace, or they wouldn't be the victor or the leader in that marketplace. But I look at business like it's a spiritual game. Like every religion on earth, regardless of what you believe, at some levels, treat your neighbor, love thy neighbor like thyself. There's a version of that in every religion, right? It's like, if I can do more for you than anybody else, that's a spiritual game. And oh my God, I get rewarded spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and financially if I run my business well. So to me, that's what investing is. I'm finding ways to empower people and individuals to do great things. And as I do that, I prosper and all the people around me prosper. I think that philosophy of life makes life not just feel good or okay. It's like, buying things, make people happy. Having experiences, have a much more lasting experience, creating experiences for the people you love. But the one that gives people the most joy, and most people don't know it till they do it, is contribution. And all the studies show that. Like somebody buys somebody a Starbucks, they buy 5 people Starbucks they don't know. Research shows, because they can check what happens in your mouth or your biochemistry, your level of joy can last a day or 2 off of that. You can buy a thing and it can disappear in a very short period of time. So I try to get people hooked on contribution, because then it gives you a reason to grow more and earn more, because it doesn't take that much. For most of the people on this call are doing quite well, right? Most people like to do more. But meeting your basic needs. So, but if you're saying, like, when I started saying I'm going to feed 1 billion people, I'm going to plant 100 million trees, when I started saying, like, I need $10 million a year just for some contributions, that's different than I was trying to figure out how to make $10 million without working so my overhead was covered. It just, your brain becomes a creator of value. And I'm a big believer. Don't buy into I'm a manager of my circumstances. I'm the creator of my life, and my job is to figure out how to do that by adding value.
Excellent. It was very good. Very inspiring to me. Christopher, it is in the moments of decision that your destiny is shaped. Where did I might have got that one from? Are we currently in the midst of a paradigm shift? We mentioned a little bit before with cryptos. And again, I mean, I didn't get it at first, but the Tudor Jones paper, and I did my own, I thought for myself. Maybe that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I look at what's happening now, and there was an article that featured with Tony about the metaverse, about NFTs. How do we decide to adapt, or if we don't, are we going to be left behind?
You know, getting left behind in some cases is really problematic. In other cases, it can be wise to tread cautiously. So I'm going to give an answer that has both sides of that. So we must always be investigating what is new, what is different, what is changing, how the world is progressing, skate where the puck is going, not where it was. So we have to be aware of what's happening. And at the same time, we need to make sure we understand the reason why we're doing it. The number one mistake that I see investors make is they invest in something they really don't get and they don't understand. Because then whenever that thesis is tested, they don't have staying power. They don't have the conviction that allows them to actually stay with it, and so they panic at the wrong possible time. Whether that be crypto or any other kind of asset class, it's true across the board, and it's true in our life as well, and relationships as well. But ultimately, there are some shifts that are absolutely going to take over and change the way that we do business, that change the way that we live our lives, the way our health is managed. Blockchain, as an example, it will completely revolutionize industries as a whole. It will change and eliminate jobs and create jobs, but ultimately it will be something that people need to understand and know how to participate in that revolutionary change. The currencies themselves, NFTs, things of that nature, they may be a fad, they may not be. Time will tell. Right now, we look at them as more trading vehicles, not necessarily investment vehicles. Will they be inflationary hedge? We'll see. We don't know. They might be, they might not be. But I can trade around that thesis and have a bias, but then ultimately continue to do my work, continue to understand the best we can, and in the meantime, participate in the growth of the industry as a whole. And it's what we refer to as the picks and the shovels. So back when the shales were getting very, very prosperous and changing the way that fossil fuels were being excavated from the earth, the shales were a really big deal. But we didn't know for sure which fields were going to be the very best. So what we did is we said, let's buy the picks and the shovels. It goes back to the gold rush. It didn't matter what the price of gold did. If somebody bought your shovel, you made money. And that was the same concept, which is why we focused more on infrastructure and on things that were making the system work to be able to allow the shales to prosper. The same is true here. Where we're getting most of our exposure is through our network of venture capital managers who are in the trenches and know it infinitely better than we ever will, and how to build out the infrastructure to allow blockchain to change the world, to allow NFTs to function, to allow, whether it be blockchain, Ethereum, or anything else, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or anything else, to really be the value add. I don't know which one's going to be the winner. I don't pretend to know. But I do know that there's going to be someone that's going to provide that infrastructure. That's who we want to invest in. That's the way we've been focusing on it right now, while we continue to learn more about an immensely complex subject.
Let me jump on there if I may.
Please.
Add on to that. I think a really important philosophy in business, you can also think about as investment, is I always tell people there's two businesses you got to run: the business you're in and the business you're becoming. Some people are just working on the business they're becoming and they're not focusing on the core business, and that's inevitably going to be a challenge. Other people are let their head down and they're not anticipating where the world may be going. And as a result, somebody's going to take them out competition-wise. So like in my business, like even this facility, we built this facility. Then my next thing is how do we make it even more connected? What do we do? So we just did, you read about it in the paper probably there, it sounds like, or some article, but we just did, I sold a company I had that was doing virtual reality. We sold it to Apple. So I saw they could take it further. My team and I did. I got some insight. Apple won't tell you everything, but I'll give you a clue. The world that we're in right now is going to change so radically. You're going to have 4K in each eye. Then a year later, it'll be 8K. Then it'll be 16K, right? Then it'll be 32. Between 16 and 32, you can't tell the difference between being in person and virtual reality. That's 4 to 5 years away, probably at the outside. These big-ass goggles, already you have some ones that look like Oakleys that are coming out shortly. So it'll change the game from this gamer thing to an experience of life where you can go wherever you want. So I'm doing it right now. I'm anticipating that. We started taking, the metaverse. We had an event here last week, business program, and we had a bunch of our platinum partners experimenting it and going to these locations and having the time of their life. It made it even better than some things we do in person because they could fly and move and do things that sound crazy. But once you're in it, even older people start to adapt and go, this is really awesome. Well, right now, that's still clunky as far as I'm concerned, but we're doing it now. We're taking a small slice of our time, energy, and money and doing it now. I'm AI. I'm building an AI right now with one of the top firms in the world, and this firm has got a product that's come out. If you look it online, take a look at Moxie, M-O-X-I-E, watch it on YouTube. You will not believe what they can already do. And so I have everything, every intervention I've done since I was in my 20s, suicides, turnarounds, business people, it's all recorded. So AI needs this mass amount of data, right, to learn. Well, I've got it in spades in a way almost no humans do. So the AI is learning all these principles, and I'm working with a firm that has this level of interactivity that your 5-year-old or 6-year-old will be captivated and think they're talking to someone, where it pauses and listens and asks questions. I tested out myself, and it was like, I said, well, good morning. I said, good morning, Moxie. He's like, what did you do this morning, Tony? And I said, well, I was just with my 4-month-old daughter. And he said, oh my God, what's her name? This is the conversation.
It's amazing.
Because there'll be 100 billion nodes available. So you have to be making bets along the way. I mean, Twitter was one of those little things on the side that was thrown off. Nobody believed in it. It grew into this monster. You have to say, I'm going to take a percentage of my time, my energy, or my money and say, I'm going to test. I'm going to be one of the leaders in testing it. But I look at it like I do tail risk. It could go to nothing and it doesn't affect my life at all, but I want to be first. If you're first, you're the leader. If you're the leader, you're going to have the rewards of being that leader.
No one cares about my investment advice, but I'm a big believer in the future. Yes, that is funny. Of the metaverse. I'm glad to see that you're so active in that.
Yes.
We'll find out, but I think, like you said, not 20 years. We'll kind of know in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, exactly right.
And it's interesting times. AJ, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give today?
So as a non-advisor, what I am telling people, because they're still asking me for my opinion. So number 1, I already alluded earlier in our conversation, is stress test your portfolio. I cannot stress how important it is to stress test your portfolio, that if there was a 50% correction in the 2 largest asset classes that you're exposed to, would you be able to survive? That's number 1. That's by far the most important one. Number 2 is have some downside protection. Whatever it is. In my portfolio, approximately 2%, 2.5% of my overall portfolio is downside protection, that if and when there is a correction, not if, I don't know when, but when there's a correction, I've got the peace of mind that I'm going to have an explosive insurance policy, one that happens with a small portion of my portfolio. Another thing is the tax landscape could be changing very soon. I'm reading about it. Sit down with your tax and estate attorneys and find out what can you do between now and year end to optimize your taxes. Can you give some more gifting right now? I believe we're allowed to gift approximately 23 million away. Have you done that? Or have you gotten close to it? Evaluate all those specific pieces. I call those the gimmies. Like there's no reason to leave that money on the table if you can have some proper planning. Another piece that I'll say is maybe refinance all your debt. Like you've got the lowest interest rates that we've had in ever probably, if not generations. Go across all your loans that you have, if it's a mortgage, or if it's a plain loan, or if it's student debt, and just refinance it. Rates are significantly lower right now.
AJ, I'm going to stay with you. We spoke offline before about what would make you change your mind about an investment. And now I'm going to make it a little more real time. You mentioned earlier a small allocation to Bitcoin and Ethereum that you might have felt differently about a year or two ago. So using that as an example, what caused you to change your mind?
So the first time I tried to buy Bitcoin was approximately 4 years ago.
It was hard,
I
wasn't it?
tried to open up a Coinbase account. I just left one of Tony's financial seminars, and I thought, let me take a position in Bitcoin. This will be a smart piece. And I remember trying to open up a Coinbase account and allocate $100,000 to Bitcoin. And I remember watching where it was hovering. It was like $950 a coin. And I saw it go across 1,000. I go, oh my goodness, I think I missed the opportunity. And I spent like 45 minutes trying to open an account and link it to my bank account so I can actually buy it. And I wasn't able to do it. And I thought, this is not good use of my time. I should go focus on building my business. And that 100,000, at least at the peak, would have been $5-6 million, which was somewhat painful, but I'm glad I focused on my business still. But when I retired last year, that's when I started having a little bit more time and getting out of my business and saying, what are other things that I should be doing with my investment portfolio that I have not done yet? I added crypto only to my portfolio just a year ago or late last year. I'm glad I did when I did, but still, that's one piece that made me change my mind as I started getting more and more educated. A part of crypto that scares me is I remember 20 years ago when people were talking about the internet, I remember investors telling me, AJ, the internet is here to stay. And I agree with that, and I agreed with it back then. But they were investing 100%, 50 to 100% of their portfolio in technology and internet companies with leverage. So even though the internet has stayed and evolved, a lot of those investors, their portfolios blew up 20 years ago. It took them 10, 15 years just to get back to break even, if they were able to get back to break even. And I feel crypto, at least for my friends that are all in, and when I say all in, 100% into crypto or levered into crypto, I feel like I don't know right now if Bitcoin is going to be the Google in 20 years from now or if it's going to be the Ask Jeeves in 20 years from now. So I say everything in moderation is the way I would look at it when it comes to the crypto space.
I am not saying I agree, but I had someone very knowledgeable say that he's not sure that maybe Ethereum is the iPhone and maybe Bitcoin is the BlackBerry.
Yeah.
And we don't know, which is why I guess hedging our bets and being careful. Tony, I've been wanting to ask you this one. I read on Primal Key on Twitter, it's a handle, influencers are eating the world. So Charlie D'Amelio, the young teenager on TikTok, has approximately 120 million followers. She has more followers as a teenager than Joe Biden had votes. Now, she's too young to run for political office, but I thought about that. These influencers, assuming they still hold their influence, are going to be politically powerful. They're being invited to be creatives in VC firms. Yes. They're going to be creating VC firms. I think maybe people our age are laughing them off way too quickly. I'm interested in them.
I would agree 100%. And also, they're going to evolve, right? They're influencers now, and as they evolve and grow, as long as they continue to add value, their audience will stay with them as their audience ages and comes to a different stage. I mean, think about it. When you're 20 years old, you're going to be president of the United States, you're going to be a billionaire, you're going to have, whatever your life's going to be. You're not tested, and that probably lasts till you're about 35 or so, and then you start thinking, well, maybe I'm not completely bulletproof, I'm not all those things yet, and you start to evaluate maybe family, kids. So I think some of these young influencers, they're going to stay, but they're going to evolve, and they're going to have more influence, the ones that keep their audience, and I think you're crazy not to do it. I think we have to all remember, like, the Z generation, which is what you're really talking about, right? Millennials are already 40 years old. That's the leading edge. That's hard for my brain to even imagine, right? 25 to 40. So they're no longer young. There's a war online. I'm sure you've seen it if you watch between millennials, right, and the Z generation. The Z generation making fun of them that they're old and they're out of date. And the things that millennials said about boomers are now being said about millennials, and they really get pissed off about it. They have these battles about it. But my point is, every generation has a different psychology, and every generation before it will look down on it to some extent. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's stupid to do that because they are showing us what's coming. And if you want to be on the leading edge, you want to model some of that. You want to get around them. So I have groups of them that I interact with. I bring them together and we go have a meeting and I say, tell me what you think. Or I invite them to my seminars. And of course they tell everybody about it. And so I get a whole nother generation to be impacted. But I also learn from them. And I think when you stop learning, you're an idiot. I think it was, I had a chance to interview Coach Wooden, the greatest college basketball coach from UCLA in history, won 10 out of 12 national NCAA championships, won 88 games in a row. Nobody else even won, 3 years, and the guy won 10 out of 12, right? So there's nobody like him, and you got a different team every time. And his whole philosophy was, it's what you learn after you know everything that really counts. And I think that's something.
So after I'm 14?
Yes, exactly. Or after you're 50 or 60 still, making sure you're still learning and not just living off of what you've learned in the past.
Christopher, money is chasing art, baseball cards, collectible cars. I have a billionaire member who has now a $50 million NFL, NBA baseball card collection, which, by the way, pre-COVID was probably closer to 12 or 15 million. I was watching in Real Sports for Brian Gumbel an interview of a 17-year-old in my backyard, speaking of college, where parents gave him $5,000 and converted it during COVID, a little bit of luck, into a $4 million cards collection. Forget college. This is, and I'm not saying I agree with that per se, but this is what he's doing now. So kind of rare collectibles. They may be illiquid. We may scratch our head a little bit, but is that also a portfolio hedge?
It's interesting because of the fact that people forgot about collectibles for a period of time. Every asset, when you go back, if it's been around long enough, it will have these periods that people just kind of ignore it, and then it plays catch up. And then they ignore it, and it plays catch up. Collectibles have always been a pretty good long-term investment. Going back to wine back in, many, many centuries ago, it was really a simple strategy. You bought 2 cases. When it came out, you drank one, you sold the other one 10 years later to pay for your next cases, right? That's the methodology. That's collectibles. So there always is a place in that for someone who becomes an expert. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got when I was in my 20s is if you're going to be a collector of anything, you need to specialize in something. If you're going to collect wine, you better know one particular type of wine. Watches, cars, baseball cards, whatever the case might be. Because if you're not the expert and you don't really understand it, you're the sucker. It's really simple. If you're at the auction and you don't know what it's supposed to trade for and you just bid on it because you like it, you may end up with a good investment, but you also may be the one that they saw coming. So collectibles are just fine. There's a bubble in most major asset classes right now. And included in collectibles, there are some pockets that makes you scratch your head. But that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they may not be the right place right now. So understand the market. Be prepared, have a plan. When the market corrects, if you want to collect them because they give you satisfaction and variety and you like to be able to own them, fine. Just know the market and don't be somebody who just overpays. And we talk a lot about the higher fool theory. Don't be the fool who says, I'm going to pay this price because there's a bigger fool that'll come along later. No. You got to make sure the price you pay is a price you're comfortable with.
AJ, what's the best singular investment advice that you ever heard?
When I first started the industry, I remember speaking with a gentleman, I think I was in my early 20s, and Mr. Brown was a fellow advisor that had been in the business for 40 plus years. And I asked him that question, what is the best investment advice that you can give a rookie like me? And he said, and this was back then, where today if I wanted to buy a stock, I could just press a button on my iPhone and I buy a stock or an ETF. Back then we used to write tickets. Buy 100 shares or 1,000 shares of IBM. And he said, AJ, the best investments that I've ever made in my life were those tickets that I wrote with a shaking hand. Meaning to make the investment when there's absolute fear out there. And to believe when that fear is out there that we will get out of it. And it's just something that I was very grateful to hear that at such a young age. And I also still believe it right now. The best investments that you will ever make is when everybody's panicking and you think things are going to zero.
Great advice. I do want to be respectful of time. Maybe we could have one final question for each of our participants. I'm going to break that rule quickly for you, Tony, with a really quick one, though. Who wins in a fight, smart or crazy?
A short-term fight may be crazy. A long-term fight, smart. I think you really have to think about the duration of anything. Somebody can win the battle and you can win the war. That's where strategy comes. And I think strategy trumps, tactics over the long term always. So I think that's why I said, leaders anticipate, losers react. The crazy is usually a reaction. So I look at it that way in both business and investing.
And I did want to bring up, it's even in my notes, you brought him up several times today. I'm his biggest fan. In 1939, the late great investor Sir John Templeton bought 100 shares of every company trading under a dollar per share. Over the next few years, his investment multiplied many, many times. And yes, many of the companies he invested in went bankrupt or didn't make any money. Now, how does this correlate to today's market and some of the hedging and maybe some of the crypto and unique things we're seeing today? Is there, and this is maybe what AJ said about having dry powder and having flexibility in making decisions in distressed markets, Sir John Templeton that year amplified that like maybe no other investor ever.
But he didn't speculate based on where markets were going. He always bought for value. When I asked him, what will you invest in? He said, I'll invest in a plant if I can get it for 80% worth, less than it's worth. He not only made money in 1939 like that, but you know where he went after the war? He invested in Japan. He literally bought property after the nuclear bombing for, nickels of what it was really worth. And of course, remember what happened to Japan in the 1980s. They were, what everybody was looking at in the world. That's where the most successful businesses on earth had come. So it's really, if you're going to make investments from that perspective, you've got to make sure the value is there. If you're going to make these other ones, I take a small percentage, like 3% of my assets, and I'll say, I'm going to do this stuff for fun. I don't know if NFTs are going to make any sense. Maybe they'll be explosive, maybe they're not. I'm going to experiment knowing that it's like gambling. I look at it as gambling money. Instead of going gambling to Vegas, let me gamble on something that actually could be valuable and it could also be worthless. But it doesn't affect my overall well-being, but I'm still on the lead of what's going on. So I think if you're gonna be all in though, the all in is when there's blood in the streets. I mean, Paul Tudor was talking about this the other day again. He's like, times like this, when the market changes, that's when you'll make your most money. There's nothing like it. So instead of being, oh my God, what's going to happen? I want to protect myself so when that happens, I got cash to be a buyer instead of being a seller in a marketplace where the prices are going down.
Thank you. Chris, I think we're both fans of economist Lacey Hunt. And I'm paraphrasing, so I may not get it perfectly. There are only two ways out of this debt mess, and I probably should have asked earlier macro-centric questions, so we're kind of jumping right into it in the end after more than 2 hours. Hyperinflation and effectively a major tech upgrade, advancements like you and Tony spoke about in AI and the metaverse. The hyperinflation part's a little scary.
Oh, it should be scary. Hyperinflation is something that can do incredible damage to portfolios and obviously purchasing power. So, right now what we know is that we have a problem as a country. We have too much debt. We have to figure out how to retire it. But at the same time, if you try to stop the inflation that it has created, you're going to hurt yourself because now your interest expense is so much more on that very, very high debt level. So how do you get out of that? Normally the way you get out of it is by growth. And you just accept a level of inflation that's higher than maybe you want it to be for an extended period of time, or you have to devalue the currency dramatically. Neither one of those situations is a positive outcome. Maybe there's a third rabbit in the hat that nobody's thought of. Modern monetary theory thinks that they've got that solved and it's okay to spend an unlimited amount of money. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not. But what we do know without question is it creates risks that did not exist a year ago. Those risks, we cannot say how they're going to turn out, but we need to be prepared for those risks and be able to stomach those outcomes if those risks turn out to be very, very painful and not be caught flat-footed. We have a saying, I've said this on so many interviews for years, sell when you can, not when you have to. Right now, protect your portfolio when you can, not when you have to. That's the same mindset, whether it's hyperinflation or any other kind of painful scenario. But we do know, to the second half of your question, we are going to continue to change as a world because of technology. That in so many different ways, because of just the way it's going to impact jobs, it's going to impact, what education is worth and what it's not worth. And ultimately, we have to be prepared to adapt to that. all of which is going to be something that's a challenge for our generation and the generation below us to figure out the path forward to balance that wonderful advancements in technology against actually what's good for people and for jobs and for growth.
That's a great answer. AJ, what I would call the unknown unknowns, black swans. I suppose you could argue COVID might have been one. Some people may debate that as purely not a black swan. I would say, how do we hedge our portfolios? I think you spoke earlier about diversification and about some of the other strategies that you and Christopher have done. But maybe in closing and putting a bow on that, what else would you add?
Yeah, sure. So, no one could have predicted different pandemics or different crises. But one thing we should do is we should learn from our crisis and don't let it go to waste. So what am I doing or sharing how to protect our wealth from the next crisis is, number one, everything in moderation. You don't want to be overextended in any one specific place. I do believe in everything in moderation. Number two, leverage destroys people if they're overexposed. I do believe in leverage, intelligent leverage. If you have your real estate portfolio levered modestly, you're not borrowing against your portfolios. But I think leverage can destroy you, so you want to be very thoughtful about that. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but have insurance to make sure that you get that downside explosive growth. Have exposure to asset classes that are not correlated to one another, and have staying power. I mean, if you're in it for the short term, you can get yourself in trouble. If you're in it for the long term and rebalancing the portfolio, where reducing the winners and adding to the losers, it sounds so elementary when you say that, but it's amazing how many of the most sophisticated portfolios and families do not rebalance their portfolios back, and then they wish they did when the market rebalances it for you.
Of course. Well, I mean, everyone.
Can I add one thing to that too? I just want to say something just as a theme, because so many of you are helping families to take care of their wealth. Going back to Sir John Templeton, I remember asking him the first time I interviewed him when I was 32 years old, and then I asked him again the last time right before he passed. Gave me the same answer. I was just wondering if he would. I said, what is the secret to wealth? Here's the first international investor who became a billionaire by investing. And he saved 50% of his income initially. He took all that money and made those bets during the toughest time. So I thought he knew what he was going to say. And he said, it's what you teach. And I said, well, I teach a lot of things. What is it? He says, the secret to wealth is gratitude. He said, because it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you're ungrateful, you're not wealthy. If there are lots of people who have a lot of money and all they are is stressed all the time, trying to figure out where it is and where it's going to go, and they're living in fear and uncertainty, and they have tremendous abundance. And there are people that seemingly have nothing. I have a place in Fiji, and the people there are just, they have nothing, but they don't feel poor. They're so grateful for everything. I remember one time I was talking to this man, I said, Fijians seem to be the happiest people in the world. He goes, I believe that's true. And then he said, of course, I've never been anywhere else, ha, 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 And I said, well, what makes you happy? He goes, oh, the sunshine. I go, of course, it's sunny here all the time. He goes, and the rain. And then everything makes them happy because they're grateful. And I think one of the things that's missing in all the financial discussions is that in the end, money is just a mindset, right? Your assets can make you feel good or make you feel bad at any level. It's really, can you be grateful for what you have? And the more that you can develop that experience inside yourself, then as things go up and down and throughout time, you're not in a panic. And you operate from a different place with your family and with yourself. And I think it's really important whenever you think about wealth, think about what are you appreciating? Because if you don't appreciate it, it isn't wealth.
Wow, that's very well said. Everyone, this has been quite an honor over 2 hours with Tony, with Christopher, and with AJ. We hope you all had a chance to enjoy it, to learn from it. The team will be working together behind the scenes on producing a level of clips and videos, probably about a month out. So simply just be patient. Those of our live people that would like to watch it again, and hopefully many, many, many more that will see it in its recordings. Why don't we quickly, maybe 30 seconds or so, go around to each of the participants. I know many of you may want to reach out to Christopher, to AJ, and perhaps Tony, some of these amazing charitable and philanthropic endeavors that you're active in. We have relationships that would like to learn more and make contributions.
Well, if I have so many that I'm a part of, but one in particular, if you want to contribute in the area of hunger, under Feeding America, if you go to Feeding America / I think it's Tony Robbins, and you make a donation there, I'll match you. And so I do that up to $1 million per person, and I've pretty sizable donations I've made, and I got another year and a half left. So if you want to make a donation there, it's a matching setup. So I try to help people, again, double their impact, get a greater return by us partnering. So that's one if you're interested in that. And then Trees for the Future is the organization I do tree planting with, because we go into sub-Saharan Africa where people are making $1.25 a day and not surviving. And so they try to go across the desert to get to Europe, and they usually die. So we do a 4-year training program where we not only provide the water and the trees, but we build these forest gardens for them. And we make it so they have, instead of 1 crop, they have 12 crops. So if something happens, they're still great. And they usually rise to about $10 a day versus $1.25, which, believe it or not, makes them wealthy in those countries. There are a whole series of organizations. I wouldn't just mention one when it comes to slavery, but I think you all know enough to know what you're passionate about. But if you want to do something I'm involved with and double it, Feeding America would be a great one, and they're really efficient in the delivery of meals, which is why I partnered with them.
Thank you. Christopher, how can people learn more about what you're doing?
So probably the best way is our website, cazinvestments.com, CAZinvestments with an S.com. Obviously, our team would be happy to talk to anybody about their specific situation and get into more detail about anything that we talked about today.
And AJ, you're not an advisor anymore, so how would you like to end and wrap up? Or maybe people could follow you on social media. How could they learn more?
Sure, they can go to a website that I just set up recently, more for teaching the wisdom and insights that I learned from the 50 people that Tony interviewed for Money Master the Game, or all my network, because I'm hearing some of the best ideas and thought leadership. So we have a website called GuptaInsights.com, insights with an S, and you can go there, and I'm going to put a lot of content, educational content over there. And anytime I'm personally making an investment, I'll post, this is what I'm doing, and this is where I'm doing it, and you could follow, and you can go directly to those opportunities yourself.
Excellent. And for those that are not familiar with me and Family Office Association, which is billions and billions of people, hopefully we'll change that one day. I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association and the host of the Angelo Robles podcast on iTunes, Apple, and Spotify. And probably my best known platform lately is my platform on YouTube. It simply is Family Office. Really exciting to do the interview today. I've interviewed Tony live in person before in Santa Monica. That was a lot of fun. And we've had opportunities in my organization to interview people whose names came up today: Tudor Jones, Ray Dalio. You can learn about us through FamilyOfficeAssociation.com or one of the social media platforms that I noted. There was a name to come up today that I've almost gotten him 3 times, but his team hasn't said yes yet. And I would really love to, and that's Kyle Bass. I'm a big fan. So
I could make that happen for you.
Thank you. Yeah. I would love to interview him.
Kyle's a good friend, and I invest with him as well. We're actually partners on a project. So
I've been a big fan since 2008, and for obvious reasons why. So I do appreciate all of you, our live attendees today, those that will see this in the future in audio and video. I think it's timeless, it's evergreen. I hope you're going to have a chance to enjoy it. And again, thank you very much to Tony, to Christopher, and to AJ. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.